across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
I tell you what, it's all happening at this end. Welcome back. It's the home of common sense. Thank you to Julia. She's away for a week, but back after that. Alex Phillips will be filling in. Lots to get through this afternoon, as you've been hearing. US President Donald Trump has held talks, what he calls great talks, with Russia and Ukraine. And there's a good possibility of ending what he's described as a horrible, very bloody war. But is there a danger zone in what Mr. Trump is trying to do? We'll look at that. Will he achieve peace in our time? We'll look at that story in just a moment. Also this afternoon, Reform UK will place a windfall tax on wind and solar farms if the party wins the next election, as it promises to scrap, quote, net stupid zero. More on that coming up. And Prime Minister Keir Starmer has criticised the judge who granted Palestinian migrants the right to stay under the Ukrainian refugee scheme, calling it the wrong decision. Well, it was certainly that, mate. We'll have more on that story, of course, and take your comments on all of this along the way as well. Everything you need to know and all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. I'm intrigued by this. Foreign affairs are always tricky to kind of capture the zeitgeist if you're not in the country where the story emanates from. Now, this is a clear-cut case, however, I'd like to think, where Ukraine does have ramifications. It's on our doorstep, relatively speaking. It's in Europe, in our continent. And, of course, they are a friend of this nation. So I think our affinity, I know there are some kind of curious Putin fanboys out there who see no wrong and think tough old Vlad is the way forward. He's a good Iron Man for his country. Parking that aside, let's just try and be objective about this. Is this genius international manoeuvring from President Trump, or is this his Chamberlain moment, the peace in our time moment, caving in, an appeasement, and we know what followed back in the 1930s. The US leader and President Trump have begun, and President Putin have begun talks to end the war in Ukraine 3 years after the full-scale invasion by Russia. Mr. Trump has held a 90-minute phone call with his Russian counterpart. This happened yesterday. It's the first confirmed contact between the pair since Donald Trump returned to the White House in January. He later spoke with President Zelensky of Ukraine and said that Kiev wanted a deal to bring the fighting to an end. Mr. Trump said, "I've just had lengthy and highly productive phone calls with President Vladimir Putin of Russia." He wrote this on his Truth Social platform. He says, "We agreed to work together very closely, including visiting each other's nations. We've also agreed to have our respective teams start negotiating immediately. And we will begin by calling President Zelensky of Ukraine to inform him of the conversation, something I will do right now." So he's true to his word. He's spoken to Mr. Putin. I would imagine that was a slightly longer phone call. And he's now spoken to Zelensky. Now, some have suggested that concessions on Ukraine have essentially just played into the hands of President Putin. This is at a time you will be familiar, I'm sure. You don't have to have your eye fully on the ball to realise there's a lot of intelligence out there that says Moscow is preparing its military for a major war in Europe. And back to the Chamberlain comparison, you appease, you give an inch, and somebody takes not just a yard, but a couple of acres. And that's perhaps what we're talking about. Some have suggested that concessions on Ukraine will have played into Vladimir Putin's hands. And of course, this could cause the problem. US defense chiefs have told European counterparts that Ukraine's dream of returning to its pre-2014 borders was an illusionary goal, and that Kiev's wish for NATO membership was not realistic. This is going to be a royal kicking for Mr. Zelensky. Trump's statements are widely seen as a major victory for Putin and a devastating blow for Zelensky. How are you assessing this? I think the wider question, and I think what Trump's tried to do with Israel is admirable, and I think he's singing from the correct hymn sheet on that. It's clearly not without all manner of issues along the way, but I think the direction of travel is sound. I think this is a whole different ballgame. We could have a problem here. Donald Trump, I believe, has a greater interest in appeasing Russia than he does of Ukraine. I mean, that seems to be where the smart money is, and that could be a huge problem. 0344 499 1000. Give me your assessment of what do you think is likely to happen here. Because, of course, there will be an overview that says, well, look, it's stopped. They've all gone, yep, no more to see here. Where all the weapons are going, all the military are being removed, everybody back to basics, and we can carry on with our lives. Apart from this bit of Ukraine, which will be kind of a little bit more Russian than it used to be. That's potentially the upshot of this. Is that inevitable? Is that the only way? Everybody wants to come out like all of these things. Everybody has to come out as the victor, right? Okay, nobody wants to come out as, you know, unfortunately we lost this one. That ain't going to happen. Both of those leaders, Zelensky and Putin, will need to stand on a big podium at some point, possibly together. I don't hold your breath on that one, but certainly individually they will need to stand on a podium and say, we won. Perhaps not in those words, that's what they will need to say. Can Trump's intervention here achieve this? 0344 499 1000. Will Donald Trump achieve peace in our time? Let's get a word on this and the other big stories of the day. Theo Usherwood, the political commentator, is back with us. Afternoon to you, Theo.
Good afternoon to you. Great
nice to have you with us. Let's have a little listen then to Mr. Trump, firstly, emphasising his belief that Ukraine needs to make peace with its enemy, Russia. Here he is.
Do you view Ukraine as an equal member of this peace process?
It's an interesting question. I think they have to make peace. Their people are being killed, and I think they have to make peace. I said that was not a good war to go into, and I think they have to make peace. That's what I think.
But not an equal member of the process, Theo. I mean, that's very telling.
It's very telling, and you know, people with far more knowledge of the NATO alliance and the relationship that goes back, of course, to the end of the Second World War between America and Europe, Western Europe. You know, calling yesterday perhaps one of the most significant days of this century. The split formally between America under Donald Trump and Europe. Yeah. And we know, of course, that this is about, in the short term at least, it's about Ukraine, but it's about a much bigger question than that, actually. It's about whether America will stand by Europe after this peace process, should Vladimir Putin go away with his tail up, having secured a chunk of Ukraine, and then come back for more, because Peter Hegseth, the Defense Secretary in the United States, was absolutely clear yesterday. It was not realistic for Ukraine to go back to its to its 2014 borders. It was not realistic for Ukraine to become a member of NATO. America was not going to put troops on the ground in Ukraine to ensure that the peace agreement was upheld, and it was not going to continue to fund in the way that it has done this, the Ukrainian war effort. In effect, Europe is now on its own, and we've got to find the money ourselves to defend ourselves against Russia.
What's in it for Donald Trump? I mean, why would Donald Trump want to see, if you like, an expanded Russia? And we know that Putin's heart is on the old USSR. I mean, he's never going to quite get to that stage, but that's the direction he wants to go.
Yeah, he wants, from Putin's point of view, he wants to, reinvigorate national pride. He's a nationalistic leader. Make no mistake about it. And he wants to ensure that, for his domestic audience, at least, I mean, he's an authoritarian leader. He wants to make sure for his domestic audience that he restores pride in his office and in him as a president. He can't afford to lose that, and we've seen, that's why we've seen this, war effort and Russia press ahead. And they may have hoped it would have happened much quicker in terms of a result, but make no mistake about it, he's going to, given that the opening negotiations has already swung in Putin's favour with the announcements yesterday, this is Putin is going to win this negotiation with Zelensky.
And there is a lot of, you call it word on the street, whatever you like, off-the-record briefings, but certainly intelligence chiefs are talking about Moscow preparing a major war in Europe. One would assume that would mean where next after Ukraine?
Yeah, look, it was interesting. I've just come out of a briefing actually with, which happens every day with journalists, political journalists, and the Prime Minister's spokesman was in a tricky spot because he's saying we want to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position. We're turning around to him and saying, well, hang on a moment. How is not ensuring, or saying it's unrealistic to have a membership of NATO putting Ukraine in the strongest possible position? To answer, no proper answer to that point came back from the Prime Minister's spokesman, because of course Keir Starmer doesn't want to criticise Donald Trump. He wants to keep Donald Trump happy on the one hand because we've got the threat of steel tariffs and other tariffs being introduced, but on the other hand, they couldn't give, Number 10 couldn't give any guarantee that if Donald Trump isn't going to put American boots on the ground in Ukraine, a British troop's going to go on the ground into Ukraine. And Maria Eagle, the defence minister, has just been out in the House of Commons. She was asked by Rishi Sunak, the former Prime Minister, would British troops be committed to Ukraine? No answer on that. We're told it's too early to get ahead of ourselves. But of course, we wouldn't want to put troops on the ground in Ukraine if they're not going to be backed up by American forces, because should it fall to the worst, should we see grey operations that we've seen from from Russian allies, I guess is it's not the cleanest way of putting it, but those sort of grey operations where is it soldiers or is it sort of operatives? We could find ourselves in an invidious position of being drawn into a conflict with Russia, but without the support of America. It's a really dangerous time we're in right now.
Very. And of course, as I said in the intro there, Theo, much like any conflict, they have to end with all parties being able to stand on a podium and look at the camera down the barrel and say, yep, we've got what we wanted, we've won. They've all got to be able to say that somehow.
Yes, but
this doesn't look as if
Trump, you heard Donald Trump there saying, I want peace. But there is a question mark over, okay, we get peace now, but is it really peace if it doesn't hold? Is it really peace if Vladimir Putin goes away, he strengthens his military, he takes a breather and then comes back for a NATO country, and now we don't know, question mark, whether Trump, is actually going to intervene. I mean, from looking what was said yesterday by Hegseth and Trump himself, it's questionable that actually we're going to intervene. And at the same time, Donald Trump, in fairness to the American president, has been pretty clear that he would like to see European nations spend more on their military. He's talking about, and one figure who's banding around was 5% of GDP on their military, and of course he's sick and tired of America always footing the bill. But here in the UK, the Treasury under Rachel Reeves has repeatedly said no, we're not going to even set a time frame on when we're going to spend 2.5% of our GDP on our military. It might be sometime around 2032. That's not going to cut any mustard in Washington.
No, not at all, which is why we're asking the question, will Donald Trump achieve peace in our time? 0344 499 1000. We are going to be speaking to Sergei Petyakov, former Deputy Minister of Justice of Ukraine, also Cormac Smith, former Ukrainian Foreign Minister Advisor, and Greg Swenson joins us as well, Chairman of Republicans Overseas, which will give us more of an American Trump-like perspective on this. 1:15, Theo Ushwood is with us. Let's look at this story. It's Reform UK, Theo. They've pledged to scrap, quote, net stupid zero and introduce a windfall tax on wind and solar farms to recover costs of subsidies, claiming renewable energy policies are driving up household bills. Let's have a listen to Nigel Farage criticising how much taxpayer money the government wastes on stupid initiatives.
Do you ever wonder where your taxes go and whether your money is being spent properly? Well, have a look at what's come across my desk. Oh, you'll like this. The environmental impact of filmmaking using Star Wars to improve sector sustainability practices. Now, I'm not even making it up. Over £200,000. Try this. The cultural legacies of the British Empire. Classical music's colonial history, 1750 to 1900, 1.2 million, funded by UK Research and Innovation, a non-departmental government body. When you see what they're doing in America, do you get the feeling we ought to be doing it here? This is all a complete waste of your taxpayer money. It's keeping people in jobs who don't deserve to have them. This is the first in a series of these.
And of course he would extend that, as we said, to net zero. So they're not just talking about kind of scrapping it, they're talking about taxing it as well, which is a relatively new take on this one.
So two things here. The net zero argument is going to become bigger over the next. I mean, what was interesting, I covered the farmers' protests on, was it Monday, in Whitehall. Yeah. What's interesting, actually, going down there and speaking to farmers, it'd be like, yes, we're unhappy with inheritance tax, the exemption that we had, and of course that's going to be removed. The next thing on their list, to a man, to a woman, to every single person standing by a tractor, the next thing on their list was net zero. They are furious about net zero. Of course, we know the farming community is impacted by net zero because of emissions from cows, so forth.
Apparently so.
But what's really interesting is this is their number one concern, and it's going to get bigger because, of course, before the election, Labour were promising to cut our energy bills by £300 as a result of transitioning to net zero. That promise has now fallen by the wayside completely. Ministers won't even repeat it on the floor of the House of Commons. They won't even, £300, let alone saying it's going to cut our energy bills.
And they were quite unequivocal about that at the time.
Yeah, they were before the election. That was a cast iron promise. What's also interesting is the Labour left are getting really upset about this. I was listening to a very senior trade union leader talk about this at a conference I attended a couple of weeks ago, and they are furious because he's representing his members are up in Middlesbrough, they're up in the they're up in the northeast, where many of their members go and work on rigs and so forth, oil rigs and so forth over in the North Sea, and they're saying, okay, well, we're going to lose our jobs, and then when are we going to get our jobs in? When are we going to get our jobs in that new renewable energy sector? And you had Jürgen Mayer, the head of GB Energy, but muttering. I mean, it literally had to be dragged out of him. Those jobs may not exist in 20 years. Well, what's going to happen in the interim? Where are those working class jobs going to go in the interim? And they haven't thought this particular issue through. And it's not just opposition. I know you play Nigel Farage there, but on the left of the Labour Party, in those trade unions, they are furious about this.
It's interesting. Corbyn always had that strange, curious relationship with his own conscience in some respects with nuclear power workers, because he hated the idea of nuclear. And those that worked in that industry, but of course he wanted to protect the jobs of those that worked in that industry. So it is a tricky one.
Yeah, for the GMB, for Unite, for all of those trade unions, those are their members. It's their jobs, it's their livelihoods, and Labour needs to. It doesn't often get talked about much when we talk about the Tories, they all have their different names. There's the ERG, there's the Five Families and all that. But in Labour, make no mistake, these splits are just as deep between, those on the left, those who are occupying working class, manual, but often skilled jobs, very skilled jobs, highly skilled. Working on an oil rig is not easy work and you have to be very proficient. At the same time, versus the environmental vote, we saw the pressure the Green Party put Labour under at the last election, particularly on those sort of middle-class London voters who thought Starmer was a bit too much like the Tories, and actually they quite like this was something Starmer was wary of, and Labour managed to shore up that base of the vote. Obviously very pro-Corbyn previously, but he managed to shore up that promise of the vote by promising green jobs, by promising the net zero agenda, by putting somebody like Ed Miliband, who really is, I was talking to somebody about this, Ed Miliband is the environmentalist guy. If you want to know you've got the right person in the right ministry, Ed Miliband is it for the environment. He's done all of that, but don't make no mistake, in the Labour Party, there are people who are really worried that actually that jobs are going to go, livelihoods are going to be lost because of this net zero agenda being driven by the government.
Will they row back? Because the Heathrow expansion, very much.
There is always that option, of course.
Ed Miliband's still in situ. Rosebank, the oil field. There's another one.
I think you're right to point that out, and I think that is, of course, the other option. That actually we see that the pendulum swing back the other way. Reality bites. Keir Starmer's already started to speak positively about Rosebank. Ed Miliband seems to be. He's offering an option where he could support the third runway at Heathrow as long as we meet our carbon emission targets. That actually the big promise that was outlined at the election suddenly gets whittled away. But that will then have, the reverse effect that you see the environmental vote start to chip away.
That's exactly
within Labour.
But I wonder how long Ed Miliband can keep playing that one. Okay, we'll have the third runway, but don't worry, we're going to build. We're going to plant 6 trees and a cactus in Cleethorpes, which will make up for it. That'll be fine. But you can't. He can't keep that up. We're going to talk some more in a moment. Theo Ushwood is with us, the political commentator. More stories still to come. Calls from you as well. We are, of course, talking about Donald Trump. Is this peace in our time from Trump's perspective? Can he really solve the problem? 0344 499 1000.
I do worry that the government is getting as closely involved as this in building projects, because, building projects might not be perfect and there might not be the number of construction workers we need to build them, but do we really want the government sort of this closely connected to it?
We've had years and years and decades of poor house building numbers. I mean, last year alone, Mike, there was only 5,995 social houses built. Yeah. So we have a massive problem.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
1:25. Theo Ushwood is with us. Let's have a look at this story. This was an extraordinary one, the failed asylum seeker that can stay in the UK because she joined a terror group. Now, of course, this comes on the back of Chicken Nugget Gate, Theo, as I think we can now call it. The person that was gave the reasoning for not going back to their own country of Albania because their kid didn't like the food, particularly chicken nuggets. It was literally mentioned in the summing up. And now a Nigerian woman who was granted asylum in the UK after joining the indigenous people of Biafra. This is a terrorist group to strengthen her asylum claim. I think she tried about 8 times.
Yes.
And kept getting refused. And then eventually they said, yeah, we can't send you to Nigeria. You're part of a terror group. They'll kill you.
Yes. So this is a group that isn't actually prescribed in this country. But the argument was that by joining the terror group, that actually what it meant that she returned to Nigeria, the terror group is obviously fighting the Nigerian state, the Nigerian government, she would be persecuted.
Yeah.
And therefore, as she has a right to be free from under the European Convention of Human Rights. I forget which article exactly, but there is 8. That's the right to family life, though.
Oh, that's family life.
That's family life. I think there's another one which says right from persecution.
Oh, from
right
persecution.
Right to be free from persecution.
I'm going 7. Could be 9. Who knows? There's a lot of articles in that.
Let me look it up. But there is an article in there which says you do have a right not to be tortured and not to be put to death.
Yeah.
And we are, of course, signatories to the European Convention on Human Rights, and therefore we cannot knowingly put somebody in a position where they are going to be likely to be murdered or tortured or maimed or whatever. And therefore her appeal was
She was gaming the system here, sure.
And that is what I think.
Really?
And that is what many of your listeners will think, that you have these individuals and they have some smart lawyers, and they go, if you just say this, then
you could be home and dry.
Then you're home and dry, because of course this falls under the European Convention of Human Rights. And people are thinking, well, actually, that isn't how our asylum system should work.
Yeah.
Our asylum system should be there for people who actually are genuinely at risk of persecution, who genuinely need to find safe haven, and actually, if they've come through a country where they could previously find safe haven, and obviously most people who come into this country are travelling through France, which is a perfectly safe country, that's where they should be able to reside. And then, and it's the taxpayer who puts the bill.
Sure.
It's the hotels. It's the hotel bill. What's that, £8 million a day at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely.
And education and healthcare and all the rest of it.
It's just change behind the sofa. That's all it is.
It's not. It's a lot of money.
Just the £8 million. Apparently the government got loads of that kind of money.
I didn't catch your sense of irony there.
Yes, indeed.
Satire.
Well, I mean, it's thrown out.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money, and obviously, and also the other thing is that I think there's always a temptation when people are debating this on the radio and television studios where they don't see it, but actually, the Home Office is always looking for the best value for money for the taxpayer, and so they're finding hotels in poorest parts of the country and the cheapest parts of the country where the hotel rates are the lowest, and it is communities in the north of England or down outside of London that are feeling the brunt of this, that actually they see their communities changing, and I think it's really important to draw a line. It's often, these individuals, it's very easy to say, these individuals are racist or they don't want their communities changing, but actually, I think most, 99.9% of the people who live in these communities are perfectly willing to have asylum seekers. It's just the scale, and it's the fact that their communities are bearing the brunt of this particular problem, and I think that's what causes what the particular tension, and actually makes people say, well, hang on a moment, it's all very well you sitting there down in London and saying I should do this or I do that, but actually, it's our community that's being changed beyond what we know.
Let's just look at this as a final story. The UK economy saw an unexpected growth at the end of last year. Concerns remain, of course. It's fairly sluggish. Long-term prospects is another debate. Let's have a listen to Rachel Reeves speaking just a few weeks ago, outlining Labour's plans for growth and how they intend to turn things around.
Low growth is not our destiny. But growth will not come without a fight. Without a government willing to take the right decisions now to change our country's future for the better. That's what our plan for change is all about. That is what drives me as Chancellor.
There it is. Well, you'd hope it would drive any chancellor. I mean, that is the general way it's meant to be. UK economy grew by a massive, this is a big figure, 0.1% in quarter 4 of 2024. The government will say, well, we'll take that as distinct from it going the other way, which some were projecting. Of course, you have to then add in this inconvenient factor, Theo, based on their own reckoning and their own rhetoric, this would be the Conservatives that were responsible for this rise in growth, because everything else is the Tories' fault.
The numbers are negligible. If we're going to get back to people actually feeling any better off in their back pockets, we're going to have to do a lot better than 0.1% of growth. Behind the numbers, there are some numbers around, especially in construction, where it was 0.5%, slight uptick, and ministers were getting quite excited by that. But for people to really see the difference, you need to be into 2-3%. That's where you get the economy on firing on all cylinders. And of course, Rachel Reeves might be able to point, well, we're not in recession, this is better than perhaps we might have hoped for. But there's been another story out today about her LinkedIn page and the fact that actually she left the Bank of England 6 months sooner than it originally said on her LinkedIn page, and question marks about whether this apparently an investigation into her expenses. Ian, which is again at the same briefing I just mentioned earlier. The Prime Minister's spokesman was asked about whether he had full confidence in Rachel Reeves. Yes, he does, we're told. Any concerns whatsoever about her past conduct? No concerns, we were told. He's standing by Rachel Reeves completely. But this is, this story. You don't want to overstate things, but this will put a serious question mark over Rachel Reeves as Chancellor. Expect more pressure in, leading into the weekend, and it could well be the case that come the reshuffle, the Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer actually decides to dispense with the current Chancellor, replace, names in the frame, potentially Yvette Cooper in the Home Office, to bring in, because this has not been. The problem with the Treasury is they've got the whole strategy wrong. Okay, if you just put the whole, the LinkedIn page and expenses to one side from my previous job, but the whole strategy in the Treasury has just been completely wrong from the very start. Talking the country down, 14 years of the, Tory mess that we've had to clean up. People take notice of that. Is this a country where actually, do I want to go and spend some money on that holiday? Do I want to go and buy that new car? People take notice of that. Then you add in the £40 billion of tax rises at the end of October, and suddenly we're supposed, we're trying to, and now we're in a situation where she wants to talk about economic growth and boosterism and getting the economy going. It's like getting on a roller coaster and then getting to the, getting halfway along and saying, I want to get off and I want to go in the other direction. Yeah. It's just not possible.
We will watch with interest. Never a dull moment over there at the Treasury. Never a dull moment when Theo Usherwood is with us. We'll speak again soon, Theo. Political commentator Theo Usherwood with us on the programme. We'll talk Ukraine, what is happening there, some Ukrainian voices and American voices to come. And, of course, crucially from you as well, will Donald Trump achieve peace in our time? 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
To get through on this as well. Will Donald Trump achieve peace in our time? He says Russia's very bloody war on Ukraine could be nearing its end after he held talks with both sides. The US president says Mr. Putin had agreed to start talks, quote, immediately. However, their Ukrainian counterpart, Mr. Zelensky, has warned his country won't accept any bilateral agreements on its fate in its absence. We'll talk to Greg Swenson shortly, chairman of Republicans Overseas, and also Cormac Smith, former Ukraine Foreign Minister advisor. First, Sergei Pechikov, former Deputy Minister of Justice in Ukraine, of course. Sergei, good afternoon to you. Nice to have you with us. Just give us your assessment, your response, firstly, to what we're hearing coming from Mr. Trump.
Good afternoon, Ian. So, President Trump said that he wants to deal with Russia to stop this war, and he wants this quickly. And it seems that he's serious on delivering on it. So the peace talks have been started and launched by the phone calls that he made with Mr. Putin and then the Ukrainian president, Mr. Zelensky. He set the scene by saying that, well, Ukraine will not join NATO in the immediate future. And also there's low chances of Ukraine regaining all of the occupied territories. So some exchange is possible. So this is the limitation that is pronounced by the President Trump, and I think he will start from this, trying to get the best deal possible. What is important is that Ukraine is included in this conversation because ultimately any negotiations will end up in agreement that will have to be accepted by Ukrainian people as just and serving their interests. So for that, Ukraine has to be present at the negotiating table and not waiting outside for the result to be forced on the country. Secondly, really important is to have the serious security guarantees. What we don't want to see is some sort of a quick deal that results in lifting of the sanctions against Russia, allowing Putin to regain its economic strength and launch another attack in 5 years or 10 years' time, as he did after the first attack, except annexing Crimea in 2014. So we are looking at the security guarantees that will serve the lasting peace, not buying time for Putin to launch another attack. And thirdly, this plan will definitely have to include how Ukraine will be reconstructed and rebuilt, whether it's going to be the Russian money that is frozen in the EU and the US used for these purposes, and these are dozens of billions of Russian money, or the money will come from somewhere else. Without this, there's not going to be a peace in Ukraine. Ukraine has been shattered by the Russian bombings all over. Many millions of people left the country, and in order for them to come back, they have to be sure about the security situation and have the jobs. Yeah. And for that, there's a lot of funding required.
Mr. Trump wouldn't confirm that Ukraine were an equal part of this negotiation when he was asked that question. One would assume that would be disturbing to Mr. Zelensky and Ukrainian people. That is surely not the point to begin a discussion by telling one party you're not really in the same league as the other person at the negotiating table. That's going to be problematic. And also, as you just alluded to as well, US Defence Chief Peter Hegseth telling European counterparts that returning to the pre-2014 borders was an illusionary goal. I mean, these will be real problems for Zelensky.
Now, firstly, of course, Ukraine wants to be on equal footing at these negotiations, and the statement is very unfortunate. Let's see what are going to be the practical consequences of that. This can be reversed at any point of time. This is just a figure of speech, not hopefully an official position, and Ukraine will be invited to any talks wherever and whenever they happen. With respect to the return of a territory, it has been stated by Zelensky that Ukraine currently has no military strength to take them back by force. At the same time, no agreement is possible where Ukraine will legally recognize the annexation of those territories. Ukrainian people will just not accept that. So it seems that the space for the deal is where the status of the occupied territories will not be regulated. Some sort of armistice and security line will be drawn. Hopefully, some of the peacekeepers in a big number necessary to ensure the peace and security at this contact line will be regulated. And the question on the legal status of this territory will be, left in the gray zone. And we've seen in many conflicts where those kind of questions are not seen as a priority. So in a way, this statement does not destroy the chances of a peace agreement. It just sets the limits.
Sergei, thank you for your time. Really appreciate that. Sergei Petyukov, who's the former Deputy Minister of Justice in Ukraine. Cormac Smith joins us, former Ukrainian Foreign Minister advisor. Cormac, always good to get your take on this. You heard what Mr. Petyukov said just then. These are not necessarily hurdles that can't be surmounted, but there is a very real sense for many that Ukraine are the small guy in this story, and the real negotiations will happen with Mr. Putin. Is that fair?
Ian, first off, hello. It's always good to join you. Look, this is incredibly difficult for the Ukrainians, and Sergei, I think, was being as moderate and diplomatic as he could at a time when his country is under the most abominable pressure. I said earlier on today in another interview, this is as bad as it gets. The champagne corks will be popping in the Kremlin at the moment. Putin has been desperate for this. And effectively, I think what it looks like is that Trump is riding to his rescue like some sort of a white knight. Trump is supposed to be the author of The Art of the Deal. In what sort of a universe, before you even start negotiating, do you signal that you are giving one side everything they want? And you know what Pete Hegseth said in Brussels yesterday, and what was reported from Donald Trump's conversation with Vladimir Putin very closely mirror each other. And the two main things there is that, Ukraine will have to give up territory, and that NATO membership is off the table. We need to jerk ourselves back into reality. Ukraine has been illegally invaded, its sovereign territory, from 2014. Tens of thousands of its people have been killed, murdered, raped, kidnapped. Children have been illegally deported. Men in the occupied areas have been conscripted to fight against their own country, and they are to accept that somehow they are to give up this territory. I think.
Has there got to be some, though? Sorry to talk over you, Cormac, but some would say, look, it's a negotiation. Mr. Zelensky might have to do a little bit of that. There's got to be some wiggle room. That's how negotiations work.
I'm very much afraid that Mr. Zelensky may have to do some of that. But, to go back to this picture of that's how negotiations work, did we negotiate with Hitler? No, we didn't. We fought until the evil of Nazism was defeated. Did we, in a much smaller conflict, did we negotiate with the junta in Argentina during the Falklands War? No, we didn't, because we saw it as a just cause, and we fought until the very end. We have had 3 years to support Ukraine and to enable Ukraine to defeat Russia and drive Russia back off their territory. And I'm afraid during that 3 years, we have not given Ukraine everything they needed. We have drip-fed the support into such a way that we gave them sufficient to keep their head above water, but not to actually win. It seems to me now we have squandered that. The onus is very, very clearly now on Europe. I think it was very clear that Donald Trump was always going to pivot towards the Far East. The question is whether in Europe we are going to stand up. And this, of course, brings into very sharp focus the debate we're having in the UK at the moment about the amount we spend on defence. Currently at 2.3, the government's saying there's a ceiling of 2.5. Sure. But that ceiling probably needs to be, it probably needs to be a minimum of 3%. That's not just a hard choice for our leaders. That's a hard choice for you and me, Ian, as taxpayers, and for everybody listening to this programme.
Indeed. Cormac, thank you for your time. It's a pessimistic but an informed view from Cormac Smith. He's the former Ukraine Foreign Minister advisor. Greg Swenson joins us, Chairman of Republicans Overseas. Afternoon to you, Greg. I mean, just to pick up on something that Cormac elaborated on from our first guest, the former Deputy Minister of Justice of Ukraine, and that is that what sort of negotiation can begin when one party has already been acknowledged as being perhaps more junior than the other party. They were the words, paraphrasing here, of Mr. Trump. How can they move forward when they are the terms of agreement on this?
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain truth to the argument. You know, you don't want to leave something on the table right away that's could be held back and used in negotiating. But that ship sailed a long time ago. I think it's very clear that NATO membership was off the table. I think even the Biden administration was clear about that. And so I think that this is just an illusion that needed some reality. I thought that's why Pete Hegseth's comments yesterday were wise. And so look, there needs to be negotiations and there needs to be compromise. This is not February of 2022. Cormac was right about the drip feeding. Biden, was very incrementalist in his support, as opposed to the way President Trump was in his first term, where he sent Javelin missiles and he put sanctions on Nord Stream 2, after the Biden-Obama years, where they were, shipping blankets and other non-lethal supplies to an American airbase in Poland and then quietly trucking them to Kyiv because they didn't want to offend their adversary in Putin. And that's just, appeasement 101. And so you're seeing a lot of that again with Biden drip feeding and holding back on some of the financial support that had been authorized by Congress.
So, Craig, some are seeing this as appeasement as well, even being referred to as the Chamberlain moment, the peace in our time. Look, everything's going to be fantastic, waving the paper. And then, of course, a year later, we know what happened back in the 30s. Is it that because this does look to some people that the only winner here can be Putin? If he gets a green light and is endorsed by the White House, then what does he do next? He's going to expand on that. He will be emboldened. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I don't think so at all. In fact, again, the concessions, if you want to call them that, or the demands from both the president and the defense secretary, were ones that were so obvious. That wasn't some secret deal, where they're going to make a concession that is unwise. The NATO thing was off the table. Trump wants to, the 2014 or the pre-14 map was essentially off the table if you talk to anybody in Westminster or in Washington. So it's just unrealistic. So I think it would have been silly for them to go into negotiations with those two things still pending when everybody knows that that's off the table. I don't think Putin's going to get a free pass here. Again, if you look at the way President Trump has handled Putin in the past compared to the way Obama and Biden did, it's apples and oranges. I think he's much more serious about it.
What's in it for America to have this? I mean, obviously you could say diplomatically it's always best if countries get along nicely. It's also nice if you don't think a nuke is about to land in your backyard. All of those obvious questions. Yes, we want Putin to be to be as calm as he can be. But is there anything more going on here? I mean, I doubt whether Trump's thinking there's a great trade deal to be done with Russia. What do you think is on the agenda for Donald Trump here?
Yeah, it's impossible to predict. And President Trump is unfiltered, but also unpredictable. So he's probably got some outcome in mind. And I think he leads with peace, right? I mean, he's not a war guy. And so, he'll use military strength to great effect, and to his advantage, or the U.S. advantage, and to our allies. So I think he just wants this war to end. And again, maybe I agree with him when he often says that it never would have happened under his watch. That is true. No wars, of note started under his watch. And so, but that ship has sailed. We have to be, realistic and understand. There's got to be some realpolitik here. And I think he gets that. So, will there be a deal that's advantageous to the West, to the U.S.? Absolutely. I think one of the great outcomes of this, I hope, is that the Europeans take seriously that they have to be able to defend themselves, as the U.S. has to pay attention to China and other adversaries. So, look, this Cormac mentioned it, the 2% thing is the bare and absolute minimum. The U.S., in fact, cut defense spending under Biden 3 years in a row by 3% a year, and we're down to 3% of GDP, barely. I mean, it's really dangerous for the U.S. to be that low, and I think the Europeans have to take it seriously and get the number back up to 3 or 4%.
Listen, Greg, thank you for your time. Really appreciate that. Greg Swenson is the chairman of Republicans Overseas. You heard three voices there. Over to you on this one. Will Donald Trump achieve peace in our time? This is more, I know it's very easy to roll your eyes, isn't it, and go, well, it's a country of miles away, you know, and what's it got to do with us? Everything to do with us. Our relationship with the wider world, our relationship with the United States, our defence budget, our safety and security. See Salisbury for details. There's lots to tuck into on this one. Will Trump play a blinder on this? 0344 499 1000.
I was encouraged as well with the story today that Disney is now ditching its woke warnings on its movies, because they even went through this mad period where there were warnings on Dumbo, the cartoon film, because of a group of crows that had stereotypical black voices. Jungle Book slapped with a warning that talks about negative depictions or mistreatment of people or cultures, and they said those stereotypes were wrong then and are wrong now. Well, apparently they're not wrong now, because now they've taken the warnings off.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This one from Chris in Newbury says the Ukraine war is over. It's done. It's finished. Ukraine could have got a deal a month after the war started with virtually no deaths, but the EU convinced it to fight on because Biden wasn't in charge. The military complex was, and they would find it. That stops now. The EU will cave in in days because it hasn't fought a war without US support in over a century. The EU is now a minor economic and military power. It's USA, China, Russia, India, Brazil that will win the future. That battle is also done. Russia may be a military power. It's certainly not an economic one at the moment. And I wouldn't certainly write off, economically speaking, the collective might of France, the UK, Spain and others in that. But I think Chris is broadly quite right. And Russia being a big player is, of course, part and parcel of what Putin wants acknowledged. Chris is in Epsom on this point. Chris, how are you doing?
Hi, with the madness that's going on with our judiciary here and the fact that I can now be a llama or like.
I thought you were a llama. That's
Yeah.
I've been given false information here, Chris. So you're not yet. You're pre-llama, are you?
Yeah, I'm careful. I might spit in your eye.
You never know.
Listen, seriously, we don't know what Trump's plan is, and he's thrown things out there. Cormac's quite right in what he says, but there's a couple of things that are missing. You've got to look at the bigger picture. The bigger picture is that budget spending on defence was down in America. They've supplied an awful lot to Ukraine, but it couldn't go on forever, and especially not with China flexing its muscles, flying jets over Taiwan. Trump's plan, Trump is, let's make America great again. So if he has to sacrifice Ukraine, and he's warned us in Europe, we've got to step up our spending. All right, you've got Spain and Italy spending just under 1% of GDP on defence.
Yeah.
All right, because what will happen? There will be a deal done. It's not going to be an all easy ride for Putin. I don't believe that for 1 minute. But he has already got, which is not reported in the mainstream media, he's already got Russian-speaking people pouring into the Balkans. He's got soldiers in non-badged uniforms in Moldova, which have been there for 2 years now, and they've declared an independent state. Exactly what they did in Donbass. Now, Putin will withdraw to whatever is agreed. He'll lick his wounds, and he'll go again. That's why Poland's upped its ante to 6% of GDP.
I mean, that is the warning, isn't it? That there are other countries. I don't know whether Putin would invade Poland, but it is that worry, that concern, that this gives a green light to Putin. His ego is massaged. He thinks, I can get away with this. I'll go for the next game.
Well, that's because Trump's got his eye on the Far East, because that's what's going to aid America far better than Europe. Yeah. You can't blame him for that. His whole presidency was devoted to making America great again and putting America first. Yeah. So I do understand. I don't hold anything against
indeed, and I've got to stop there, Chris, for time, but thank you for that. And I do kind of wonder, and this might sound very simplistic, but whether this is about Trump's ego, and I say that in a kind of kind way, that if he can be seen to have solved, Israel, Gaza, Ukraine and Russia, then that does give him an awful lot of space and scope domestically with his own people. This is a guy that gets things done. Wow, we can trust him. So it kind of does that. So very sort of chess move, tactical stuff on a grand scale. But as Chris just said, I mean, the Middle East, where does he go next in terms of making sure his international mark is well and truly stamped? Will Donald Trump achieve peace in our time? More from you coming up after the news.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. 3 minutes after 2 o'clock. Welcome back to the home of common sense. We're talking Donald Trump. He says he's held great talks with Russia and Ukraine. There's a good possibility of ending what he's described as that horrible, very bloody war. Will he achieve this? Can he achieve peace in our time? This is relevant to us on many levels. 0344 499 1000. Also this afternoon, a hate preacher who claimed it was better to be a paedophile than Miss Prez has been invited to speak in Britain, despite being banned across Europe. Only over here could we have said, let's get the paedophile apologist to come round the place and give some speeches. Seriously? More on that coming up. We'll talk to one former mayor who's going to give us his take on this. Prime Minister Keir Starmer has criticised the judge who granted Palestinian migrants the right to stay under the Ukrainian refugee scheme. He said it was the wrong decision. Nice observation, Keir. He's right about that much. Where does it go next? More of that on the way. Everything you need to know and all the breaking news. 0344 499 1000. Barry says the biggest enemy at the moment is the Prime Minister. Could be right about that. And Rachel Reeves. Trevor says, I think Trump is clever. He may be feeding Putin's ego. I think he could get a much better deal for Ukraine than we think. I hope so, because I will be disappointed by Trump, who I've supported since 2016. Let's wait and see. Trump never follows the set rule. What's interesting about this is that it does kind of divide the room a bit from people who might ordinarily be supporters of Trump. I know Trevor is kind of wavering on that, just on this specific point, but it certainly has divided things up, who are seeing this as some sort of appeasement to Putin and not the general order of events of a Western democracy. I don't know what Trump thinks about Ukraine. He obviously sees Russia as a bigger player. In military terms, it is. It can cause a lot of damage. Economically, it's very small. I think its entire economy is something up there with the about as big as the state of California, just by way of a comparison. Let's get a word on this and the other big political stories of the day. Sophie Warringer is back with us, Deputy Policy Director at the Centre for Social Justice. Good afternoon to you, Sophia.
Good afternoon, Ian. Great to be here.
Nice to have you back with us. It's interesting. Trump did say he will solve Ukraine. Initially, he said he'll solve it in a day. Didn't quite achieve that, but I think he was sort of speaking more generally that he'll get it done quickly. This could be the beginning of the end. That is what it's hoped, but it's not going to come without all manner of complications and difficulties for all parties concerned here.
You have to hand it to him, really, that he has got things moving on this front where no one else really could. There was a stalemate of 3 years in the making where no one was really making much progress. And obviously, almost, I think the calculations are over 1 million lives have been lost on both sides. And of course, Ukraine taking in a lot of the casualties and also conceding a lot of their land as well. So he has really shaken things up. You're right to say that it will divide the camp on whether this is appeasement of Putin. At the moment, President Putin of Russia is getting two things which he really wants. One is, it looks like, not having to give back the land that either that they annexed Crimea in 2014 or the land that they took in the recent invasion 3 years ago. And it also looks like Zelensky, though, who is, of course, the president of Ukraine, is falling into line. And that is unusual because he has been very much, we will never fight, we will never quit, we will never concede. And now he's saying, we will talk about peace. So the fact that he is willing to at least have a conversation with Trump. Maybe he feels sidelined. Obviously, Trump has gone to Putin first, and that's an interesting decision from his perspective. Of course, seeing Putin as the kind of bigger player here, But it does look like Zelensky will consider it, which is a huge win if you would want peace, because obviously that's not been the talk that have been coming out of Ukraine up until now.
It's kind of interesting if you look back to the old kind of Cold War era, you know, the arch enemies of the USSR as it was then and the United States, two tribes, you know, all manner of possibilities, people building bunkers in their back garden in Watford because they thought there might well be a war. There would have been no sort of automatic chinwag with the leader of the USSR. Things have changed. What is in it for America, though? I mean, you know, their relationship with Russia is not based on a huge trading. It's not based on some massive economic benefit down the line, I don't think. What is it about? What does Trump get out of this?
Well, they've currently spent £180 billion in lethal aid to Ukraine since the start of the war. So I guess what is in it for them is to stem the flow of that money. And obviously, Trump has campaigned on an America First platform. And the people in America seem to be very keen that the money that they see going to Ukraine is actually spent domestically. And President Trump has made some very interesting comments about trying to claw back some of the money that has been spent in Ukraine through potentially getting control of some of their rare earth materials. It's a very kind of mineral intense, rich country, which is very important for microchip development and other kind of computer hardware development. So it may be that he sees this as a way to pander to his domestic audience, be strong and promise peace, and also to try and claw back some of the money that has gone to Ukraine. But I do think that he wants to be the shaker. He wants to be the mover. He wants to be the person that makes things happen. And he clearly is in this perspective. Whether he will get everything he wants is a different question, but he's clearly commanding the situation and being the person everyone looks to. He's even promised, as part of the readout from this conversation, President Putin and he apparently agreed to visit each other's countries. That would be unprecedented for Putin to kind of leave the confines of his Russian enclaves and go to America. Let's see if that happens. But it definitely sounds like things are on the move.
Yeah, indeed. Let's have a look at this story. The failed asylum seeker who can stay in the UK. I mean, God, the lawyer played a blinder on this one, clearly, because she joined a terror group. Nigerian woman granted asylum. She joined the indigenous people of Biafra, a terrorist group, to strengthen her asylum claim, and then, of course, said, well, I can't be sent back to Nigeria because, look, I'm a member of this terror group and the Nigerian government will just put me in jail or do horrible things to me. She tried 8 times to apply to stay in this country. She was rejected at every level until recently. And in the end, the judge acknowledged her involvement was not genuine, but granted asylum due to her political opinions. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, this is almost this is beyond the chicken nugget story the day before, or the paedophile who can't go back the day before that. I mean, it's a long list. We see somebody making a Netflix show here about this country being turned on its head because they're succeeding rather well with stories like this.
It does seem bizarre, and as you said, you thought you couldn't top the chicken nugget story. That's an asylum seeker whose claim to not be removed was rejected because they claim their son would not be able to handle the chicken nuggets abroad, and that was part, not the whole reason, but part of the reason why their claim was upheld. But this individual woman, in the case of the Nigeria case, obviously she is, as you said, applied over 8 times over 10 years. So imagine the kind of cost incurred from the taxpayer of her being housed here for 10 years. We absolutely, and I believe absolutely, want to help those who have genuine asylum claims. And we have a very strong and proud history in this country of helping those in genuine need. We think about most recently the Ukraine Home Scheme, of course, the BNO passport holders, others previously from Afghanistan, Syria, etc., various schemes where we have really helped those in need. But it does seem there are too many loopholes that are being taken advantage of. And the Prime Minister has said that the Home Secretary is looking into how those loopholes can be closed. Of course, the Conservatives have recently come strongly out of the gates on these issues, saying that they would radically rehaul how the asylum and immigration system works. And they're starting to put forward some solutions which look quite promising and are, very interestingly, the first things that Kenny, the leader of the opposition, has put forward as actually kind of policy proposals rather than principles. So they clearly see this as the number one issue that they need to get right. But I do think that the Prime Minister needs to be more clear about what his solution is. He can't just be saying, oh, this is a matter for the judges and we need to do some very technical loophole closing. There needs to be a bold rhetoric from him and a bold vision of what the solution is, because people really care about this issue across the country, and fiddling with the legal system is probably not enough for people to believe he's taking it seriously.
Yeah, you might think so. And also this story as well, and it ties into our first one. Ministry of Defence officials confirming defence spending will remain capped at 2.5% of GDP. Of course, a lot of pressure on European countries from the White House. Donald Trump has, he made the point before, and he was back in power in 2016. That moment with Angela Merkel, looking her straight in the face in front of the cameras and saying, you guys don't pay your fair share. We're putting much more proportionately into the NATO pot, this was, than you guys are. This has got to change. And here he is putting pressure on. America have had its own problems with budget reductions in defence over the years, but he wants it to be upped in Europe, including the United Kingdom. But 2.5 is as good as it's going to get, apparently.
Yeah, so the government have said that they will set out the map to get to 2.5% in the spring statement. So we're not there yet, but they will set our route there. The Chancellor has made it clear she doesn't want that to be the case until 2030 to try and get some more kind of headroom in her calculations, and understand the pressure coming from America and NATO to the UK. They want to push towards 5%. But of course, we need to remember that America itself, yes, it spends more, but it doesn't spend 5%. I think it's about 3.8% of GDP. So itself is not meeting the 5% target. And what is interesting is that the government have changed their tack on this, as they have done on many things. Previously, it was all about how they inherited an army that was unfit for fighting and probably wouldn't be eligible to kind of get involved in a real war. That was what Don Healey, the Defence Secretary, was saying in October, just a few months ago. But now he's saying, no, 2.5%, that's great, that's enough, that's kind of the direction of travel, and we're being ambitious and we're getting to that. So they are, I think, constrained by the fiscal situation, realising that they're not going to have any leeway to increase that 2.5% target, which we're already not meeting, of course. That's a plan to get there. So it does seem like no one is spending as much as they think they should be on defence, which is fine in peacetime, or fine if you're not under threat. But as Ukraine has found, suddenly can change very quickly if the situation changes.
Yeah, indeed. And at the moment, as you rightly say, with what is happening and what might happen going forward, certainly some intelligence to say it could be a little bit dicey out there. One does wonder whether it will be enough. Final one on Rachel Reeves. She's replaced portraits of former prime ministers with art commemorating things like lockdown over there at number 11. I don't know why she did this, but apparently it's her efforts to remove male-dominated imagery in line with her commitment to feminist values. I don't know. Maybe you can shine some light, Sophia, what, you being a girl and all that stuff. Maybe you can tell us that there's a reason why COVID imagery and artwork, or lockdown artwork, somehow falls under the, I can imagine a worthy professor at an art college saying, can you draw a lockdown picture from a feminist perspective, one of those kind of arty things. I'm a bit confused about this. I wouldn't have thought they'd have time on their hands, let alone money, but apparently they do.
I'm also confused. If she wants to remove artwork of men by men, which I think is what she has said, fair enough, but who wants to remember lockdown? That was a really poor time in the nation's history, and the fact that the art that is commemorating it, I would say, is also of a very dubious quality. At least get something good on the walls if you're going to. The decision to have a figurine of Millicent Fawcett, who was, of course, the leader of the suffragist movement, so that was the peaceful arm of those who were campaigning for women to have the vote, is absolutely a great decision. That was a brilliant woman who should be remembered, but it's not a zero-sum game. We don't have to scrap the brilliant men who should be remembered from our walls, just so that women can also be elevated. She's obviously clearly trying to make a point through this, but I would say she's got bigger fish to fry at the moment. She should probably focus on that.
Well, you'd think so. And like you alluded to at the beginning there, Sophia, nobody wants to be reminded of lockdown. It was a horrendous period of our time. It was futile in many respects. We know that in health terms, it didn't really do what it set out to do. Certainly economically, it was an absolute disaster. One could reasonably argue our NHS is in the state that it's in part due to the fact that we closed down hospitals, kids' mental health because we closed down schools, small businesses because we closed down small businesses, and the person in charge of the money wants to lob some pictures on the wall commemorating it.
And not even good pictures, squiggles that don't really, I would say,
Yeah.
communicate much about it, apart from a general sense of angst and anxiety, which I don't think is what you want to be kind of radiating through the office of the Chancellor as she's making big decisions in the lead up to the spring statement. So, yeah, very strange decision from her, but she's got her own taste. She can make those decisions, fair enough. But I think people will be surprised to know that the government has such a big art collection that goes up to such modern artwork as they have been displaying in the Chancellor's office. So, yeah,
Indeed,
it's something that people might be surprised to learn.
And there's probably an actual budget somewhere for this kind of nonsense, you know, rather than somebody going, well, just nip down to the Athena shop or something and grab some posters. You know, that's the way to do it, surely. You know, get David Hasselhoff behind your desk or something. He's a feminist icon, if ever there was one. Sophia, thank you, as ever. Sophia Warringer, Deputy Policy Director at the Centre for Social Justice. Thank you to her. Over to you, 0344 499 1000. A couple of comments coming in on your messages. This from Lindsay in Norwich, reference net zero. They are now proposing to cut down parts of Thetford Forest to build large solar farms. You can't make it up. And worse, some of the Green lot think it's a wonderful idea. It's not even cognitive dissonance. It's not even that. They gravitate to the why. Okay, yeah, solar panel. It's kind of like a robotic, instinctive response. You say solar panel, and it gives a nice warm feeling in the pit of the bellies of some of these people. Well, it's a good thing. It's a solar panel. Why is that about? We're cutting down a forest to build a really? Oh, don't worry, we'll build another forest. How long does that take to build a forest? I mean, what would it take to rebuild Thetford Forest? I'm guessing a couple of 100 years, maybe. I'm not sure it's going to happen in the term of this government. 0344 499 1000. Back with more from you coming next on Talk.
Maybe we should rebrand Paddington Bear as an illegal migrant. You know, so what you do is you take out the clothes that he's got now. You get him a puffer jacket.
Yes.
That's what they get when they arrive.
North Face.
Give him a machete.
Zombie knife, maybe.
Zombie knife, yeah. Put him up in a hotel, maybe somewhere.
Not that hat. A baseball cap backwards.
Baseball cap backwards. Yeah. Put him somewhere in a hotel in the centre of a town he's never been in before.
Some Reebok trainers.
Yeah, some Reebok trainers. Give him a credit card so he can buy stuff if he needs to, cigarettes, that kind of thing.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Alan in Nottingham says Trump will only postpone future conflict with his involvement in Ukraine. He has the USA and his interests at heart, not Europe and the UK. Bottom line, Europe and the UK have to step up now regarding our military capacity to meet Putin and face him down, says Alan. And I think that's it, isn't it? What, if nothing else, what Trump's going to be doing is going, look, here's your solution. I've sorted it out. This is largely a European problem. We've got Spain paying 1% of GDP, the UK 2.5%. What we really want is 5%. And if you guys aren't going to do it, why the hell are we going to do it? Because we're not. So bye. I think that's precisely where he's going with that, and that will have a lot of support back home. Pav is in Harrow on this tricky one. Pav, afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Hi.
It's becoming a bit of a trend, and I'm not sure I particularly like it because, as you know, I'm not exactly Trump's biggest fan. But the reality of the situation is he was elected very much with national self-interest at heart. Whether people like that or not is immaterial.
True.
And he will very much be playing to a domestic audience. Now, he came to office on the basis that he would stop wars. We know from his first tenure and his first administration that he was somebody who was, for the very least, let's just say anti-war in the sense that he didn't like conflict. He certainly didn't like American involvement in conflict. The concern that I have is some of the stuff, and I know this isn't the anti-Julia Harley-Brewer show. Obviously, your colleague is normally very well versed. It's rare I disagree. I would have rang, but I was busy. But some of the reactions, and she did this in the interview with Tice earlier on, frankly, to me, are a little bit over the top. And allow me, if you will, a minute or so to try to explain why. The situation is this. People keep talking about the EU. The EU, as I've said to you many a times, is a basket case militarily. It has been since post-war. Other than us and France, and you can argue about France's capabilities all you want, the reality is they have not been a military power in Europe. Europe as a whole hasn't had really adequate military, and it's basically been post-war Germany about playing up to the Americans and American presidents basically deferring and allowing, basically ensuring that they protect Europe, and essentially that they. Sorry, somebody's just knocking on my window there. Right,
really?
Essentially, America.
It's a bit dodgy when you're on the 14th floor, isn't it?
Well, this is what I mean, But America has basically guaranteed the safety of Europe, right? In that aftermath. Well, why should they continue to do so? And I think from a European zone, I'll get to the American issue in a second, this is a pivotal moment because I think finally it will dawn on European powers, if it hasn't already, and I don't think it has, that militarily their capabilities are very, very stretched, to say the least. And they are and have been reliant on America. And America has basically said, no, we're not going to do this anymore. Right? And you see this, by the way, the European leaders this morning in unison, Ian, were basically saying, we should be involved. Well, yeah, you should be, but maybe this guy doesn't want you to be. And that's the salient thing. Moving quickly on to Russia and Ukraine, one thing that I found extremely unpalatable is the mendacious examples and analogies people have been making. Well, if the UK was invaded, we wouldn't want to give up our territory. Well, nobody would. But let's just be realistic for a second in the world of geopolitics, okay? Ukraine aren't the United Kingdom. Whatever issues people may have had about our past, we are one of the leading powers in the world and the influential powers in the world. And I often compare it to a chessboard, Ian. You can't seriously argue that the pawn, however much it could potentially queen itself, is in any way equal to the knight or the bishop or indeed any other piece of magnitude until it is queened, because it's a pawn. Now, I don't mean to sound disparaging towards the Ukrainian people, and we've done our bit, in terms of supporting them, allowing the Ukrainian visa scheme. But the reality is, if we were under attack and threat, our position and our military capabilities, of course, as well as NATO, would ensure that we had personnel, which for whatever reason, Ukraine were never going to get. And so I do think, and Julie was asking the question here, I agree with her, what was the point of it? I hold my hands up. I've called you in before. I don't know what the point of it was. That's not to demean Ukraine. It's not to suggest that, I'm all of a sudden on Putin's bankroll, but it's a realistic expectation and understanding of geopolitics,
Indeed.
which unfortunately far too many people don't seem to have yet.
And it's a fair and a very fair question to raise. Listen, Pav, thank you very much indeed for that. On the back of that, Simon in Devon says what's being forgotten here is the money Ukraine has received from Europe and America, given in the form of loans, total of around about $400 billion. It's not just land Ukraine will be giving up, it will be assets stripped anyway, so it can't carry on like this for Ukraine. Money is now the main player in this one, and I guess it always is, says Simon. Thank you, Simon, for that. And Courtney in Telford says, I find Donald Trump's strategic pursuit of peace with Ukraine to be an audacious and praiseworthy endeavour. Prioritising diplomatic channels over belligerent confrontations resonates with my deep-seated convictions. Let us unequivocally lend support to initiatives aimed at fostering a cohesive and pacific global landscape that confers benefits upon all parties involved. And put like that, I don't think anyone with a brain would disagree with Courtney's point there. It makes perfect sense. One is forced to ask, I think, a reasonable question. What's the skin in the game for America? Is this just about solving a problem? Is there a financial component? Is it about security? I stand by what I said. I think if Trump plays a blinder and this thing gets solved to everybody's agreement, the scope that gives him domestically and globally, but particularly as a domestic man, is absolutely huge. It goes and stands with every bit of reason that a man that was able to solve not one but two global war zones, Israel and Ukraine. I know it's not single-handedly, but you take the point. Where Biden had stood by, largely ignored, not said very much, threw a few quid over there, made a couple of statements to the press over here. Within a couple of months, Trump is able to solve that. The hero status, there'll be Democrats vying to vote for him on this. So the wide berth he'll be given for other policies will be huge. I don't think that is specifically his only thinking, but there's naturally, he's a politician and he's a very vain one at that. There's a vanity component to this, and that's not a pejorative, that's a genuine, I hope, intelligent observation. And it does him no end of favours on the global stage either. A man that means business and gets results. What more could anyone want from a leader? 0344 499 1000. In just a couple of moments, we're going to talk about that curious story of the Islamic preacher who's been invited to speak in the UK. This is one shady son of a gun. European countries have said, we don't want this fella here. He's as dodgy as it gets. We'll talk to Andy Preston, former Mayor of Middlesbrough and now political commentator on this story. He's got a lot to say and is with us next here in the studio on Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Welcome back. 0344 499 1000. Just gone 2:30. Here's a curious story. A hate preacher who claimed it was better to be a paedophile than miss prayers has been invited to speak in Britain. Despite being banned, by the way, pretty much across the entirety of Europe, Mohammed Hoblos from Australia is scheduled to speak on February the 23rd, but the Home Office may still block his entry. We wait to see what happens. It comes after the creation of a task force to identify overseas extremists. Andy Preston is with us, political commentator, former mayor of Middlesbrough. We often talk, Andy, and you and I have spoken many times about this sort of strange upside-down world we seem to live in, where, you know, black is white, night is day, common sense. What's that? You know, this guy banned everywhere. Someone says, yeah, let's bring him over to the UK. He'll be fine.
Madness, isn't it? First of all, that someone wants to bring him, but secondly, as soon as this was publicised, there must be people monitoring this, monitoring social media, monitoring the marketing material that they're putting out to attract youngsters there to listen to him. And they should have put out a statement, the government should have put out a statement and said, this man is not welcome. By the way, Hoblos has said some terrible things about it's better to be a paedophile than to miss your prayers. But his mate, who he's doing a tour with around the UK, Manchester, Glasgow and other places, his name is Mufti Mohammed Ibn Munir.
Well pronounced, by the way. Full house points.
Has said incredibly disgraceful things, the most hideous of which, Ian, he said that Muslims should hate non-Muslims.
Wow.
That Muslims shouldn't show loyalty to any other Muslims, to non-Muslims, and that Muslims should only tolerate or interact with non-Muslims in the hope of converting them.
Yeah.
Now, we cannot have that here, can we? We cannot have it.
I mean, that's the very antithesis of everything that, you know, the progress, if you want to look at it like that, that this country has made in all sorts of areas. You know, we don't do business like this, do we?
No.
We don't have people with those views.
Someone said to me that I'm against, because I made a fuss about this on Friday and tried to raise the awareness of this problem, and it's a massive security risk for us. He's not banned in Europe for nothing. And some people said, oh, Andy, you're against free speech. I'm not against free speech. I want free speech, but we cannot let anybody say whatever they want. If it divides communities, causes trouble, and in particular poisons young minds in. And it's the youngsters I worry about. This guy, Hoblos and Munir, they're gone. We almost don't worry about what happens to them. It's the people they can influence.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? I notice Ben Houchin, mayor of Tees Valley, has been quite vocal on this. There's a lot of local people who are upset. The Home Office could still ban this.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm guessing they probably will.
Yeah.
I don't know, but that's, you know, I think they've sort of sensed some of the stuff that maybe once upon a time Labour would have been relaxed about. I wonder whether they're realising, oh God, we're in government now. This stuff really matters to people.
I think you're right. I think they will ban him. I think Labour is desperate amongst their other woes, you know, the economy and popularity plummeting. So I think they're desperate to seem tough. But to me, the issue is the fact that this is dragging on. They should have been aware of it and banned him as soon as marketing material appeared online, because they must monitor it. And secondly, last week, Saturday, Sunday, they should have said, no, this man is not coming. The fact it looks like they're thinking about it, there shouldn't be a discussion, a debate or a thought.
Nothing to think about.
He should be banned. Now.
There's nothing to think about. And there are, and particularly at a time when there's, you know, there are some tensions in some communities, and there's lots of issues around whether people assimilate, and we know, you know, what happened in the correlations with Southport and all sorts of other areas where, you know, this segregation of individuals, sometimes segregating themselves and saying, you know, we are not like you lot.
Absolutely.
You know, this feeds into all of that. Right?
Totally. This is what worries me, is actually creating division. In Middlesbrough in particular, we have a really great Muslim community, and I genuinely mean that. The people I know are peaceful, hardworking, and really kind, really kind. And I know they are not behind it, but the small group of people that are trying to orchestrate this hate preacher's visit, they're stirring up non-Muslims against Muslims. And it just escalates, doesn't it? You get two sides and they dig their heels in and it causes trouble. We cannot, Ian, we cannot let this happen.
I wonder when we get to hear from the Home Office on this. I mean, you know, look, you're a politician. Would you still call yourself a politician?
I don't, but other people do. So I don't know.
You've been a politician.
I have been a politician.
So you were, just to get this right, you were a kind of a Labour man
I was a supporter of Labour in the late 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah.
I stood for election and was elected as the directly elected mayor of Middlesbrough as an independent.
As an independent. Now, that in itself is quite a story, isn't
Yeah,
it? That
yeah,
you
it's
were
interesting.
able to, you know, give a kick in the shins to the Labour and the Tory candidate at the time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the Tory
and
guy
Middlesbrough voted for an independent.
They voted for an independent.
Yeah.
I think it worked really, really well.
Yeah.
Nationally, though, as someone who has been centre-ish under Blair and Brown, I quite liked what they did. Different world, mind you, different economy, different security risks, different levels of integration in the country. I've now gone centre-right because we're in a different regime financially. We need government cuts, and we need them rapidly, and we need stronger socially conservative policies to bring everyone back together.
What is happening out there at the moment? Because it's a really confused picture. The sense I get from Labour is that I had this thought, Andy, before they came into office, that there was, you know, because Starmer kept his powder quite dry, and when you're in opposition and the government of the day are doing so badly as the Tories were and opinion polls were, you haven't got to say very much. You've just got to keep quiet, you know, look okay, smile at the camera, say some sensible stuff, but, you know, keep your powder dry, as that phrase goes. But I thought, well, you know, when they come in, there's a big plan here. This is going to... And as it turns out, the only plan they had was they weren't the Conservatives.
Yeah, or actually, I think they had a plan to tax private school fees, but literally that was it. There was no plan for the NHS. There was no plan for social care. The crises that we have, they hadn't gathered any thoughts and come up with ideas.
Yeah.
And they're commissioning now these reports. They're going to take years to help them make a decision. They're not going to take any tough decisions. It's going to be awful. Yeah. I'm sorry for being negative. I'm sure.
Not at all. I mean, we talk about this stuff all the time, and the confusion. We were talking earlier in the week about you know, people hopping over to the fence to reform from the Conservatives. How do the Tories stop that hemorrhage? Because I mean, we had a switchboard full of people, Andy, and they were not only saying they'd moved to reform, they were saying if reform did any deal with the Tories, they wouldn't even vote for it. They feel that strongly about what they feel have been the failures of a party, the Conservatives, that they supported all of their lives. Some of them pounding the streets, giving out leaflets, diligently supporting their local MP, etc., and now feel really let down.
It's really tough for Kemi Badenoch and the Tory party right now. When you're in opposition, sometimes it's quite easy. If there's a weak government and you're in opposition, you can just slag them off and say, that's rubbish, we do it, and people like it, which is what Keir Starmer did. But when you've been in power for a long time, your ability to say stuff is vastly reduced. And with respect to reform, by the way, who've done a great job, they have mobilised and expressed the dissatisfaction that we all feel.
Yeah.
We all think Britain is broken to some extent, and they've captured that, and that's great. But the problem with reform, in my opinion, is that right now they are just a protest party. In my opinion, they don't have any solutions. They don't have any ideas. I personally believe that the Tories need to regroup. I know over the next 3 months they're going to be getting their thoughts together, coming up with policies, deciding who they are, and then going back to the country. But when the opinion polls are where they are, people jump ship. And that's what's happening with their donors, their members, and some MPs may well jump ship.
And there is this very seductive character called Nigel Farage, and even if you hate everything he stands for and fundamentally disagree with him, I mean, he's one heck of an operator. And when it comes to oratory and sounding convincing, very mesmeric man, always seems affable, likes a pint and a cigarette, you know, will stop in the street and shake your hand, and, you know, he's very relaxed in that skin. He talks the talk, and people believe he can walk the walk.
I think you're right. I said in this office with Peter Cardwell, I said that Nigel Farage will categorically be the biggest name in UK politics till the next election. It's a really tough spot for the Tories, but I believe they can do it. Now, I'm old enough to remember the SDP, a split off from Labour. They were at 50% in the opinion polls, and they ended up winning almost no seats ever.
So this was Shirley Williams,
David Owen.
David Steele.
David Steele was Liberal at the time.
That's right.
And I can't remember the others off the top of my head. And they were taking over British politics. It didn't happen.
That's how good they were, that neither of us can remember who
Reform is different, though. I mean, they've got a lot more money, they've got resources, and they've got Nigel Farage. Richard Tice is a great operator, but he's different to Nigel Farage. However, it's far too early to read much into the opinion polls. And the Tories that are panicking now are being silly, because the opinion polls will go up and down, and predicting where they'll be in 4 years, Ian, is a mug's game.
I've got the list here.
Okay.
Roy Jenkins.
Roy Jenkins.
David Owen.
Yeah.
Shirley Williams,
yes,
who I thought was a great politician.
People loved Shirley Williams.
I did a couple of TV things with Shirley Williams. I couldn't believe. I was like, wow, this woman was on the telly when I was like naught.
Really clever.
Very clever. And Bill Rogers. And
I remember Bill Rogers. I think he was Stockton North.
Was he?
I think so. Yes.
There you go. It was a trailer. I've got it all going on here. This is like
so they were going to take over the world.
Quiz.
They were polling at 50%.
Absolutely.
Back then, when I think I was at school at the time, and it was and everyone was going to vote for them. So we've seen it before. It is different. There's the Farage factor, which is real, and the other one is the money. Reform have got the money, but what people say at this point here and expressing dissatisfaction, that's totally different years down the line to voting for a party.
And that's the thing, isn't it? It's voting for a party is. You know, that we've seen, some would say, and I've heard some people who've crossed to Reform say this, they supported Boris Johnson and it went a bit wrong. But Boris was also a very charismatic character. You know, he was big on, you know, great at selling optimism.
Absolutely.
Nobody could quite do it.
We're in a new era where personality matters more than it ever did. In the past, you voted for the party, you maybe liked a leader, but now it's much more about the person. And if you don't like the person, you don't vote for the party. So it's a new game. And Farage is perfect for that because a lot of people don't like him, but loads of people do love him. And Ian, if you and I walk down the street, Borough High Street, to buy a coffee with Nigel Farage, everyone would be flooding out the coffee shops and restaurants to say hello, shake his hand.
I've been with him 100 times when that has happened. You're absolutely right. That's exactly what happens, and he's not awkward about it.
No,
he's one or two disgruntled people decide to shout something at him. Some end up in court for doing it as well. But generally speaking, he's very affable and likes a chat.
And Boris Johnson had that too.
And he had exactly that.
Exactly that star quality that transcends the party. They'll attract voters that wouldn't vote for the party normally.
By the way, Bill Rogers is still alive. He's 96.
Wow. Was I right? Was he Stockton North? Was I right about
that? He was yes, I did just see that. Stockton North.
And then he went to the House of Lords, I think.
He went to the House of Lords, He lost his seat of Stockton North when he... in fact, I just had that information right in front of me. Lost his seat, representing Stockton-on-Tees, served as Labour government under Harold Wilson, James Callaghan.
Secretary of State you go. They're polling at 50%, and in the next election he loses his seat.
Doing all of that, and then he loses his seat.
Yeah, so that tells us that we shouldn't bank on reform. I mean, really, there's a long way to go, is all I say. There's a long way to go.
Do you think the Tories can win the next election?
They definitely can. Whether they will is another matter. But 4.5 years with the twists and turns, there could be wars in Europe, there could be a pandemic, there could be another financial crisis.
True.
A million things can happen. So betting on one party now is foolish. I personally believe the Tories are in the right spot to fix things. I think we need conservative economic and social policies, and I don't think reform has the infrastructure.
There it is. Andy, thank you.
Thank you.
Really good to see you. Andy Preston, he's the former Mayor of Middlesbrough, political commentator, and all-round nice bloke, I think we can say. Thank you to Andy. Back with more from you on the way. 2:45. This is Talk.
if you have an active threat to a member of public or to a politician, you better believe it should be your policy to send somebody to protect them. And they didn't do that. I've been waiting 7 weeks for somebody to get back to me regarding my complaint against them. Finally, I heard back from the IOPC. The letter was addressed to Mr. Amos, so I don't know if that's some kind of a sick joke, telling me that they weren't going to be doing an investigation, but they couldn't tell me why. And if they think that they're going to just investigate themselves and find themselves not guilty, they have another thing coming.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. Before we go to the voice of doom, talk about winning, it's time to find out if you could be in with a chance of winning £25,000.
It's competition time, and we're giving you a chance to win a whopping £25,000. So what do you need to do to get involved? All you have to do is text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post. It's as simple as that. Once again, to get involved, just text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post.
18 plus, UK excluding NI. Enter by SMS for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on March the 3rd, 2025. Or send your name, email and contact number to £25,000 cash competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on March the 6th, 2025. This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
10 to 3 on Talk. So, the Voice of Doom. This is day 3 of the Voice of Doom. I don't know who this person is, by the way, so it's a bit of a twist on what we've previously done. Genuinely, I do not know the answer to this. I've heard it incessantly, still don't know who it is, so I'd be rubbish. It's the mystery voice with a political angle bit. Have a listen to the voice, and if you can work out who it is, you can drop us a message. Here it is.
I think it would be very difficult.
Who is that? Don't phone in, by the way, because there ain't no prize. You can message in 87222. Here it is again.
I think it would be very difficult.
I keep hearing that thinking, yeah, it sounds a bit like that. No, it's not there. That's what it does to your head, right? If we get a right answer, these are the T's and C's. We'll reveal all on the other side of the news. If we don't, it rolls over till tomorrow. Here is the voice one more time.
I think it would be very difficult.
87222, if you think you know. Let's go to Robert in Nottingham on Ukraine. Robert, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian. How are you?
Good as gold. Nice to have you with us. What are your thoughts?
Well, previous caller, I think it was Courtney, mentioned what was the point of this war. Well, I think the answer to that is that the West, well, America in particular, thought it would depose Putin and make Russia weaker. Yes. What really saddens me about Ukraine is this could have been nipped in the bud, you know, in, I think it was February 2022, when both sides, Ukraine and Russia, they'd initialed an agreement, a peace agreement, and then Boris was dispatched, presumably as the message boy for Washington, to see Zelensky to tell him, no, you've got to stand your ground, as it were.
Yeah.
So 3 years later, millions of people killed, you know, billions of pounds wasted. You know, so it really saddens me.
What would have, but Robert, just to go back to that horrendous day or that period when we first realised what had happened, had the West done nothing, where do you think this story would be now?
Well, how do you mean exactly?
Well, if Boris hadn't gone, you know, waving his checkbook as well as his support, speaking on behalf of a bit of an alliance.
I think Ukraine and Russia would have come to an agreement. They had initialed an agreement. It was just for the minions to go away and work on the details.
Yeah.
You know, so the other thing I just want to mention is it keeps on coming up about appeasement and you know, Russia might sort of walk into Poland. Well, I don't think that they're not going to do that because they're in NATO, And Putin knows that would mean he's going head-to-head with NATO.
Yeah, of course.
So I think that's a non-starter. But the other thing, from a UK point of view, I just wanted to mention, I can imagine people shouting at their radios when I say this, but we don't have an empire anymore.
Yeah.
We're really struggling to get to 2.5% GDP, and I think that'll go on for, a decade at least. What's the point of even attempting? Why don't we become a neutral power and just not get involved in external conflicts?
Well, I think ultimately that's where Donald Trump wants to be. But I guess there's an irredeemable reality here, Robert. Events, dear boy, events, all of that, yeah?
Yeah.
Robert, thank you. Robert in Nottingham on Ukraine. Thank you to him. This is Georgina down in London. Georgina, good afternoon to you. On reform.
Good afternoon to you. Yes, I think Ian, the gentleman, is it Ian Preston?
Andy Preston.
Andy Preston.
Yeah.
I think he was very defeatist in his ideas about reform. I do think that Nigel Farage will be our next PM.
Okay.
Absolutely, 100%, because he has got the attitude that the British people want. He wants what we want, and he's listening to us, which is something that the Labour Party is not doing. He's very Donald Trump in the way he looks at things. He wants to get things done, and this is what we need in Britain. We may not have an empire anymore, but what we have got left, we want to keep hold of.
It's interesting that, Andy Preston, I think now, he's a former Labour man. He's now, as he said, he's more centre-right, so he's more conservative than he is reform. He acknowledged Nigel Farage, but didn't feel they had the infrastructure in place. I tend to agree with you, and he's entitled to that view. I think that might be an underestimation of Mr Farage and Reform UK.
It's a very large underestimation.
Yep.
I say Mr Farage will be the next Prime Minister. He has got what it takes to get there and keep his position, and he will give the country what it needs.
Georgina.
Anyone who doesn't think that, they need to think again.
There it is. Thank you. Georgina, down there in London. Trevor says, I can't agree with Andy Preston regarding Nigel Farage. It wasn't long ago that people said he would never become an MP, especially after 6 attempts. He's now one of the biggest voices in politics. Loving the show. I'm 4 hours in an 8-hour wait at Moorfields High Hospital for an operation. The staff are great. Talk radio is keeping me going, says Trevor in Harrow. Good luck with the op, Trevor, as well. I hope that all goes well. Nothing worse than waiting, though, right? Let's go to Matt in Cheshire. What have you got for us, Matt? Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon, Ian. Can I first of all celebrate that our local council is falling apart?
Who runs? I might know the answer to this. Who runs your local council, Matt?
Well, he resigned earlier in the year, and he was basically slagging off Andrew Gwynn, saying he warned about the Andrew Gwynn story.
Yeah.
There have now been 11 members of our local council suspended, and these are great days.
Yeah.
It's going in tandem with Westminster falling apart as well.
It's interesting, isn't it? That who would have thought that, some nice socialists would have found themselves at the centre of a hate group on WhatsApp?
Anyone who knows anything about the Labour Party?
Well, there is that, yes. I've said it for years. I'm sure you have as well, Matt. But, there's people out there that can't get their head around the idea that, no, we're left-wing, therefore we're nice people. They really believe that's how it works. It's an absolute nonsense. It's anti-intellectual mumbo-jumbo, but they dine out on that old rubbish.
Yeah, we see what they're like on social media when they don't get their own way. When they're in opposition, it's all just an act, sort of pretending and trying to... A few people got duped into believing Keir Starmer was competent and decent, but now the reality is setting in. The main reason I rang was about Trump. I was watching TV last night, and he got a hostage back from Russia. And before he was elected, he promised his 90-year-old mother that he would get her son back.
Yeah, I think I read about this.
And he was back last night. He landed on, I'm not sure if it was Pennsylvania. kissed the turf, and he was drinking a beer with Trump about an hour later. So I just say, no matter what Trump does, even if he cured cancer, the media would despise him.
Yeah, that's true. There's a lot of people. Although, do you not sense there's a bit of a coming around, almost a new reality check that some people are having?
Like the people we just spoke about won't ever admit that there's anything good about him.
That's very true. And you know, some people have their own reasons, and you can hate the man but like the policy, right?
The rational people will admit, actually, he's not as bad as I thought. And I was thinking, he's like a mix of John Gotti and Henry Kissinger. He's probably one of the best negotiators of our time.
Well, he doesn't hang about, does he, on the negotiation table?
It's all blunt. It's all like, hacksaw job, but it seems to work.
Yeah.
And regardless of how history sees him, he is one of the most effective politicians of our lifetime.
That is absolutely true. And he's demonstrably been able to show that he is. Listen, Matt, we hit the clock, but thank you for that. It's an interesting analysis as well. I stand by what I've said consistently. I've never liked Donald Trump. I don't imagine most people would if they were working for him, sitting there in a pub having a pint. But if I'm going to have a president, I want one that gets something done, with policies that echo that very simple sentiment of common sense. And he's absolutely in that ballpark. Doesn't make any difference whether I like him or not, or you like him or not. That's not really the question. 0344 499 1000. Will we find a winner for the voice of doom? Hopefully we will. This is the voice you need to identify.
I think it would be very difficult.
Who is that? If you think you know, 87222, don't phone in, there is no prize. More calls on the way from you in a couple of moments' time. Right now, news headlines at 3 o'clock.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is talk 3 minutes after 3 o'clock. Lots to get through in this section. 0344 499 1000, including, of course, the Donald Trump story. He says he's held talks with Russia and Ukraine, and there's a good possibility of ending what he's described as that horrible, bloody war. He thinks he can do it, of course, but in the last few moments, Zelensky has said we will not accept a peace deal reached without Ukraine, says Zelensky. So it's going to be tricky, but Mr. Trump believes it can be done. Also this afternoon, a hate preacher who claimed it was better to be a paedophile than Miss Prez, yeah, he said that, has been invited to speak in Britain, despite being banned across Europe. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, or maybe you can. Perhaps we should be used to this kind of insanity and madness. We'll have more on that from you as well. And Keir Starmer has criticised the judge who granted Palestinian migrants the right to stay under the Ukrainian refugee scheme. There was clearly some big old loophole here, which a lawyer decided to exploit. Mr. Starmer says it was the wrong decision. Everything you need to know and all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. So, have we got a winner on The Voice of Doom? I think it's the only programme anywhere on planet Earth that has a political mystery voice bit. Here's the voice.
I think it would be very difficult.
These are some of the wrong answers. Nigel Farage, no. Bill Rogers, it was not. Douglas Murray, no. John McDonnell, no. Was it Jeffrey Archer? It wasn't. Prince Harry, Carol Sikora, no. John Redwood, no. William Hague, no. In fact, we still haven't got a right answer. And I also still don't know who it is. Got no further. Can we have another listen again, Sam?
I think it would be very difficult.
It's that kind of voice you think I know who that is, but I can't come up with a name, which is slightly a redundant position on a feature where your only objective is to come up with a name. So you can see the failings in that line of thought. We'll bring it back tomorrow for day 4. We'll watch with interest. 4 minutes, 5 minutes even, after 3 o'clock. Now, Reform UK plans to introduce a windfall tax on wind and solar farms if it wins the next election. They say the move would raise £10 billion a year. You could buy a lot with 10 billion quid, right? The party argues net zero policies were to blame for higher energy bills and deindustrialisation in the UK. In a moment, Ed Gemmell, leader of the Climate Party, is with us. First, Harry Wilkinson, head of policy at the Global Warming Policy Foundation. Afternoon to you, Harry. Give us your overview on this. I mean, it's well known, it's hardly a secret that Reform don't go big on the net zero thing. In fact, there's quite a lot of people don't go big on the net zero thing, but they're taking this one step further. They're not just saying we wouldn't enact these policies. We're saying if you've got a wind farm, there's a big old tax coming your way.
That's right. It was quite disappointing for me to listen to the announcements yesterday. I am someone who is deeply frustrated about how net zero is going, how our energy prices are rising. And so I think, we do need a big change from what's happened before. However, Reform's policies that they've announced will simply increase bills. They've said they want to put pylons underground. Now, putting pylons underground makes them 4.5 to 5.7 times more expensive. According to one report, the national grids say it's 10 to 20 times more expensive. That is something that will increase bills. And, when we look at this windfall tax idea, it's very important to business confidence that, when they enter into contracts with the government, as they've done so for renewable energy subsidies, those are delivered. I think those subsidies should never have been granted in the first place. But a chaotic sort of attempt to force renewables off the grid with a tax, could end in a very difficult and messy way. Dieter Helm, for example, in his cost of energy review, says we should create a bad bank. So actually take these off of consumer bills, make sure that the government meets its contractual obligations, and then pursue energy market reform. The problem is that none of these things will actually get bills down. You look at a ban on battery storage as well. We do have a very volatile grid at the moment because of all those renewables, like wind and solar, at the moment. So the batteries, albeit in a very modest way, do help manage that. And along with the decision to put the cables underground, this is a package which will increase bills, not reduce them. Ultimately, the problem we have here is there is no market to determine what the cheapest way of getting reliable power is. So any large-scale technology that you build today will need government support and government subsidy. This is not a sustainable situation. We need actual competition to find out the answers to this question, and allow, for example, renewables with batteries to compete against nuclear, to compete against gas. We just have no way of finding out the cheapest method of generation at the moment. And so people just end up paying more and more for their bills.
And when reforms say, look, this will actually lower energy bills, which is their contention, and it will be good because this whole industry is taking up jobs, it's costing, the move they say would raise 10 billion a year. You can see why some people would be enamoured by that, even if you're not, Harry.
I completely sympathise with the intention here. Renewables have been, and particularly now when we're adding new renewables onto the grid, you're building in locations where that power actually can't get to market, because maybe you have all these wind turbines in the Highlands of Scotland. That power can't get down to London. So knowingly, we are financing wind turbines that are going to be switched off most of the time, that we know that we're going to have to pay to switch off most of the time. This is incredibly inefficient. This is a disaster. And so, of course, I sympathise with that desire to actually claw some of that money back. I think, we have to find the right way to do this. So I do sympathise with that intention.
Well, I think Mr Farage and Reform would say, well, we'll just ultimately get rid of the wind thing and the solar thing, and we'll just get drilling again. Bit of fracking going on. Sorts the whole thing out.
Going forwards, I wouldn't be subsidising renewables. What we're talking about here and what Reform's policy was about was looking at, what's currently in place. I would want to have competitive auctions for firm power in the way that Dieter Helm described in his cost of energy review. I think the government needs to sit down and think about how it reforms the energy market. However, going forwards, only the technologies that can compete in the market should be built, and that's how I would get down bills.
And you don't buy into the 10 billion a year that would be raised?
Well, how much of that 10 billion is going to end up going down the drain to put all these pylons and cables underground? That could cost billions of pounds in itself. So they're taking with one hand and then sort of giving it back on unnecessary projects with the other. And batteries, batteries are a long way off. Batteries, even plus renewables at the moment, I don't think are anywhere near competitive with combined cycle gas turbines, for example. However, we have to allow innovation. Innovation is a beautiful thing, and just simply banning batteries doesn't allow for that. So I really don't see why they've also proposed to ban batteries altogether. Of course, there are safety concerns. They need to be managed appropriately. We need fire safety properly done in this instance, but just banning batteries altogether, I can't see why they would have proposed that solution.
Harry, thank you for your time. Harry Wilkinson, Head of Policy at the Global Warming Policy Foundation. Ed Gemmell is with us, leader of the Climate Party. You might curiously have more in common than you thought with our previous guest, Ed. I mean, certainly he doesn't seem to support Reform's plans, doesn't think it will come to much, and certainly won't raise 10 billion quid a year. But they are right. There's a lot of wastage going on in this net zero experiment, and one of the problems is that it is an experiment, right?
Well, I think your first comment is yes. I think Harry and I might be quite surprised that we actually come down on the same side on a lot of this. And I think just picking up one of the things he's saying there, where we should have competitive energy markets and let those energy markets, supply into the grid and based on which are more competitive, is the right way to be doing it. And, our prices have been artificially high because of the cost of gas. So look, if gas stays high, I mean, forget the carbon emissions on it. It should be renewables that we're using to produce the energy.
Or nuclear. Nuclear would do it nicely, wouldn't it? That solves everything.
Nuclear isn't actually that cheap. But yes, but the principle stays the same within that, is if it's on the cost of energy, then they should be competing. Now, I think there is one thing as well, which is completely missed out of that. You do need to invest in innovation. That's not what Reform are talking about. They're talking about, you know, actually getting rid or make it very difficult for an industry that's actually working very well for us at the moment, both our solar and our wind. But we've got to invest in innovation as well. I mean, batteries have been mentioned. And look, I'm not the greatest scientist, but I know there's companies in Oxford and Cambridge working on wood batteries, solid state batteries, and all sorts of things that will make it much more efficient. And we need to be encouraging them and getting those innovations move forward so that we can make them work and export. We've got tidal power, which at the moment is more expensive than the others, but we've got a massive amount of tidal power around our shores, which is totally predictable, totally British, using our natural resource. And we need to get into that and lead that as an industry and not think that net zero is actually a problem for us.
Do you well, one of the problems, I think, on the doorstep, if you like, on this, Ed, and it's not unreasonable, is a lot of this technology. Look, if I thought that solar and wind was going to provide me cheaper and an endless supply of energy, and it's better for the environment, I think nearly everybody would agree with that. What's not to like in that? You know, ultimately, once you've got the infrastructure in place, your energy is technically free. I mean, it's just coming from the elements. The problem with that is that there is a lot of suspicion, even from very qualified, heady people with big, impressive titles, that this is still very much experimental. Bits of it might work some of the time, but we're ploughing an awful lot of money into something where the jury is still very much out.
Well, when we say we're ploughing a lot of money in, I mean, in a sense, there's less and less government money in it. The contracts for difference scheme, on the base of the way the prices are pegged, government effectively guarantees a price, but then if it goes over that price, government makes money. So they're not actually spending as much as you might think on that. If you come to something that's completely new or very, very infantile still like Tide, then investment would need to go in. But I think it's bigger than that. And one thing that worried me very, very much by what Reform said, and which is total and utter misinformation, I mean, completely wrong, is this idea that net zero has caused deindustrialization in the UK. I mean, apart from the fact that net zero is only a concept that came out in the Climate Change Act back in 2008, and then really as a concept was only brought in 2019 when we talk about really 100% net zero. And we've been seeing a decline in our manufacturing and industry as a percentage of our GDP now for decades, for a century. In the 1970s, a third of our GDP came from manufacturing and industry, and now it's around 8%. And since we started doing net zero, it's only dropped from around 9% to around 8%. So it's not, the problem is not net zero. The problem is us, and us allowing so many things to be manufactured abroad. And we have to now create a real industrial strategy, something which Reform have no idea how to do, and something which the Labour Party and the Conservatives have no idea how to do. We have to get a big mission, a big industrial opportunity that is worldwide.
What are we gonna make though, Ed? I mean, what's the plan in Ed Gemel's world? You're leader of the Climate Party. Let's say you get the big job in number 10. What are you going to start making and producing that no one else has ever thought of before?
I think it's a direction. I think what government needs to do is to set the mission, the vision, the direction. And here we have a massive direction. The whole world's going there. You know, net zero and artificial intelligence, but I mean, they're talking about net zero here. Net zero is a direction that everybody's going in. 90% of the world economy has now set net zero targets. There is legislation going in all over the world in countries to go there.
Does that make it right, though? Does that mean they're all right? Or is it the great global habit of groupthink, Ed, where somebody has an idea, they all go to meet in Davos or wherever, they have a big powwow and everyone goes, here's a good idea, net zero, because that makes us really nice people, doesn't it? Because we don't want to kill things with bad pollutants. And everybody jumps on this. They think, well, there might be a few quid in new industries, but Richard Tice called it scrap net stupid zero. They want to scrap it altogether over there at Reform because there's many people just simply cannot see or cannot get on board with the evangelical nature of it. It's not a case of saying if the wind turbine works, you know, Fine, we all get that, but it's the nature of it taking over a lot of areas of life, the workplace, behaviour, straws, the kind of things you can and cannot drive. There's a big old list of stuff here that sounds like it's more of an ache than it is a solution.
I completely look at it a different way, Ian. Let's imagine it's you and I sitting here as board of directors, and we're in a PLC, and we've got a clean sheet, so we can do what we like. What are we going to think about doing in the future? Number one, we're going to look at where government policy is going. So whether that's in our country or in the world, where's it all going? Okay, that's one thing. We're going to look at what's being innovated on at the moment. And those innovations are signaling what people are wanting and needing. So where's all that innovation going? There's a lot of innovation in the net zero space as one of the big spaces at the moment. And then if we sat back and go, okay, so that looks like a business opportunity because policy's going there and the investment is already going there. Now let's look at that scientific bit. Maybe those scientists are wrong, but if they're not, 1.7 degrees of warming in January, 1.6 degrees of warming last year, a report come out from one of the top scientists in the world saying all of the previous predictions were conservative. And then as us as businessmen, we're going, okay, our direction, let's just make a bit of a bet. Let's go where the policy is. Let's go where the investment's already been going. And let's follow that science because it's pretty likely if that science ramps up, that there's going to be more and more investment in that area.
Yeah, there used to be a lot of investment in Betamax video recorders as well, didn't there?
Well, sure, but they're a cycle. That doesn't mean that video's gone out. Look at us here. We're only to some extent in the innovation coming out of Betamax videos. Everything goes through and moves forward. It's why when we're talking about our solar panels and our wind turbines, imagine if we drove innovation in those 50 times quicker, what they look like in 10 or 20 years. We've got to be driving those innovation cycles, Britain at the front of it, leading it, and not allowing what has been America and China making the money out of it.
OK, so we've got to make stuff then. We've got to make the windmills, we've got to make the solar panels, not just import it from China.
Absolutely not. No, we bring forward our net zero target here, do it here, create it here. We've got the innovation. It's happening. Cambridge, Oxford and many other places. I've been in some brilliant companies in Oxford recently, one called Levidian, doing amazing stuff. From methane gas, it's pulling it out the air and it's making it straight into graphene and into hydrogen, going straight into industrial processes. Absolutely fantastic. Those kind of companies are already in Britain. What we need to be doing is having more of them, investing harder and driving them into the creative industries that can then be exporting to everybody else.
OK, on that point, Ed, thank you. Ed Gemmell, leader of the Climate Party. I don't know what we're going to innovate after the windmills and the panels. Are we going to take on China? Who is the greatest exporter of solar panels? I've got a funny feeling that even if you wanted to do that tomorrow, in the same way that Thatcher back in the 70s and the 80s realised that industries were lost to elsewhere, and it was a complete pointless task, a fool's errand to try and chase it, chasing your tail across the Far East to try and catch up on textiles and clothing manufacturing. The innovation of cars, largely the domain of the Japanese and the Germans. We did a bit over here, but we realised that to start from scratch. So would you want to take on the Chinese with the solar panels? And will everybody just sort of Orwellian style work in the solar panel factory? Is that how it will be? A nice day at the office? Yeah, I made some more solar panels. Will that be the only thing we do? I'm trying to think what else could happen. Thoughts on that? Thoughts on Reform's plans to introduce a windfall tax on wind and solar panels? Solar flannels, that's about right, isn't it? Let's get some of those. I don't even know why that's vaguely amusing, because it doesn't quite make any sense, but there's something in there. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
I do worry that the government is getting as closely involved as this in building projects because, you know, building projects might not be perfect and there might not be the number of construction workers we need to build them, but do we really want the government sort of this closely connected to it?
We've had years and years and decades of poor house building numbers. I mean, last year alone, Mike, there was only 5,995 social houses built.
Yeah.
So we have a massive problem.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. 0344 499 1000 is where you'll find us. Just stick the old headphones in and we're good to go. I'm getting comment in now on the solar flannels. I mean, that's Dragon's Den waiting to happen, isn't it? Yeah, they're amazing, these solar flannels. You put them out in the sun and they dry. It's incredible. There's definitely some scope for something there. What else would we innovate in the kind of new world order of net zero? That's what our last guest, Ed, was saying. We could do something on those kind of lines. A couple of bits of breaking news. The two brothers that were accused of assaulting police officers at Manchester Airport have pleaded not guilty. 20-year-old Mohammed Fahar Amaz and Mohammed Ahmad, who is 25, are accused of causing actual bodily harm relating to that altercation at Terminal 2 last July. A trial is now scheduled for June. And some lines on Rachel Reeves as well. I think we should bring you this. Rachel Reeves, a few bits to get through here. Rachel Reeves, working at Halifax Bank of Scotland in 2009, was accused of using company expenses for personal items. A whistleblower's complaint has claimed that Reeves and two managers used expenses to fund a lavish lifestyle. The BBC reported that internal auditors investigated Reeves after concerns about spending on gifts, events and meals. The investigation found apparent rule violations, but no final outcome or official conclusion was ever reported. Documents reveal Reeves used company funds for birthday presents and a 400 quid meal for a colleague who was leaving. Personal items included wine, cosmetics, a £152 handbag, perfumes for her boss and earrings for her PA. Doubts, of course, have been raised about Rachel Reeves' CV with allegations she exaggerated her banking experience. Kemi Badenoch called Reeves to come clean about her CV and her H-Boss departure. But according to the whistleblower, she was on a spending spree with expenses for stuff that were never meant to be used for that. But no final outcome or official conclusion was reported. I mean, I'll just leave that hanging there. I mean, she wouldn't be the first, she wouldn't be the last. But she is currently the person we're meant to trust with our money. I think that's a reasonable point to move on. Steve's in Bristol. Steve, what have you got for us? Hi.
Hello, Ian. Fantastic show.
Thank
really
you.
Enjoys it. Getting back to the Ukraine business, we've got to look after them. I know that, and their women and kids deserve to come over here.
Yep.
And we're spending a lot of money. But what gets me, you go on most of these construction sites, and it's full of Ukrainians. Why ain't they back fighting for their own country then, instead of leaving it to us to have a go for it? That's what gets me. Don't get me wrong, I'm not calling them cowards, but it makes you think, doesn't it?
Everything makes me think at the moment, Steve. Life's gone nuts, hasn't it?
Yeah. I just think to myself, they're always slagging this country off and all that, this, that and the other, but you ask them to go back and do a bit for their own country, you find them to bleeding death. You know what I mean? Don't get me wrong, Ukrainian children and wives and their girlfriends and all that, babies and all that, they deserve to come over here, and Russia's out of order. That Putin's never a full shilling, I know that.
I'm not sure Ukrainians are slagging us off, are they?
Well, they're all the same, innit? They're like Russians, aren't they? To be honest with you.
Hang on a second. What do you mean they're all the same? You can't say that, Steve. Who's all the same? What, somebody who's not you?
But what I'm saying is, like, I mean, it's just that we got to look after the Ukrainians. They're nice people, this, that, and the other. Like me, but we're giving them all this money and all that. But why ain't there blokes instead of being on a building site in Britain? Why ain't we there fighting for their own land? I mean, that's what gets me.
Well, I think some are. I think they're called the army.
Well, not. But there's a lot on this job where I'm working. Jesus Christ.
Well, yes. I mean, some people. I don't know whether those people chose to come here at a time when you could come here, or whether they came here because they fled Ukraine because the place was being bombed to smithereens and they didn't want their children to die. Maybe it was that.
Well, as I said, the women and children, you've got to protect them. But I read in a paper where there's a couple of English soldiers fighting for them. They've died, and I just think to myself, well, you know, I can't get my head around it. Perhaps I'm out of order. I don't know. But
have you asked them, Steve? Have you put that question to the Ukrainians?
Ian, I don't know who you've been talking to, but you're frightened to death to speak to some people because you get reported for being this, that, and the other, and you've got to bite your tongue on certain jobs.
Well, I was going to report you as saying good morning, Mr. Ukrainian, are they? You just said hello.
Yeah. But if you mention something dodgy, like you know, it's anybody who works in the construction industry, they'll tell you, like, they're good workers, they're good grafters. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah. I mean, if you went up to one of them and said, trouble is you're all the same, aren't you, that part of the... You might get the HR call. I mean, I understand that. But if you were to say, just out of interest, what's your story then? How did you end up coming here? Were you fleeing the war? Did you come here before that? I mean, it would be interesting for your own kind of research.
I have spoken to a few of them. And a lot of them did come here before it went off over there.
Okay.
But what I'm getting to, if me and you was working away somewhere in France and England Great Britain was going to be invaded, I know for a fact, I know I wouldn't be no good. I'm 69 years of age, but I would have gone back, even if it's only to clean the toilets. I wouldn't have,
No, I'd be on the flipping beach in Nice, mate. I'd be enjoying some rays. It's great down there.
I would.
Really sunny.
Yeah, you know what I mean? I wouldn't hesitate to go back and fight for this country because I love this country. It's
I love it too. But I think the beach might be the,
but don't
might be the decide.
Fight for their own land.
I get it. Listen, Steve, thank you very much indeed for that. I mean, I hear the frustration. I don't think that the Ukrainian refugees coming to this country, couldn't give you a number on that, by the way. We certainly weren't anywhere near the sort of top of the top 5 or whatever countries where Ukrainians came, but many did. And there was a very specific reason for that. I don't think there was ever a call for every single male to join up and fight. But I do know that the Ukrainian army or their defences expanded hugely by those people that did volunteer at that time. Thoughts on that? 0344 499 1000. Glenn in Leeds says, typical Labour Chancellor, always good at spending other people's money, whack it on the company credit card. But the company credit card is in our name. HBOS was bailed out by the taxpayer when they nearly went bust back in 2008, and doctors buying gifts on us. Typical. One here from Neil. Your climate change chap believes so much in solar panels and says we should be making our own products. He can prove it by using his own money to finance it without any grants. I mean, that's the problem. Nobody has sufficiently explained, I don't think to anyone, frankly, that the experiment in re-energising our entire country through windmills and solar panels, and I'll say it again, by the way, if this thing worked a treat and it was going to be cheaper, we would all put our name to it. So why not? I think the reasonable question that emanates from this every time is, will it work to the same level of efficiency and greater, by the way, a greater level of efficiency, I should say, and cheaper than what we currently have? And if it is going to do that, will we see the fruits of that within our lifetime? Not like 100 years down the line when, there's no oil left, so you have to use oil. None of that. Like, immediately, what will it mean for jobs? What does it mean for our behaviour? What will we be able to do? And are we really going to kill planet Earth if we don't go 100% to zero on this one? Are we going to literally die because of that? think that's a reasonable question, because you know what? There's loads of areas that are apparently responsible for this thing called the end of civilization that are perfectly legal and perfectly legit. That includes the cars we drive, the way you might heat a house. You'd think there'd be a greater amount of urgency. The foot would be on the gas if we were facing inevitable Armageddon. And because we're not seeing that, and if, believe me, if governments wanted to act, they could, I don't think you'd be doing that at a slowly pace, would you? So a lot of the workings out are up for question, and something as seismic as this and potentially as expensive as this, and the taxpayer will not come out of this, I was about to say without bruises, the taxpayer will not come out of this without a darn good pasting. Even if you want to be generous and go, oh yeah, well it might cost that initially, but eventually it'll be, no. This is going to be expensive, because it has to be to get Great British Energy going. It ain't going to happen. Loads of millionaires aren't going to suddenly go, yeah, there's £25 billion of our money. Stick it in there, see what happens. They want guarantees on this stuff. They want assistance as well. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. And this, Keir Starmer has set out plans for a dozen new towns across England, which he insists will be built by British workers. Not according to our last caller, they won't be. Those pesky Ukrainians over there doing the whole thing. There is a context to that, by the way, if you didn't hear the last caller. The Prime Minister has revealed a potential 100 locations for neighbourhoods inspired by Now, is this Nansleden, the Cornish suburb near Newquay, which was shown by the King, which is shown by the King on Monday. Which was was it shown to the King, or have I read that complete? Which he was shown by the King. Who was shown? The Prime Minister was shown by the King on Monday. That's clumsy, right? That is clumsy. Come on, give me that. That is a clumsy sentence. The Prime Minister, he was shown by the King on Monday. Okay, he saw it on Monday. However, his own ministers have thrown doubt on whether there are enough skilled workers to fulfil his housing pledge. Let's speak to Henry Pryor, housing expert. Henry, is this the answer to all of our problems?
I'm not sure how you pronounce it, Ian, but let's just go with yes, and I'll leave you to do all the linguistics.
Nansleden.
Okay?
I'm going with Nansleden.
Fabulous. Go with it.
Let's do it. So, can it work? Will this be the answer to the housing crisis?
Well, I think it's part of the answer, and probably 2.5 cheers for Starmer and the Labour government for getting up and actually doing something. Although, as you rightly say, your previous caller, in all his technicolor glory, Steve, has his doubts as to who is going to be able to go onto these building sites and actually to construct them.
And you can't talk to those people because you'll be in trouble, apparently.
I would love to banter with you, Ian, about this, but I'm terribly concerned about the lawyers' rates for
100%,
your station.
100%. So, I mean, this is part and parcel, of course, of Labour's building programme.
Absolutely. Labour, as you may recall, came into office with a pledge to build 1.5 million new homes during the course of this current parliament. There is a lot of doubt as to whether they are going to be able to achieve that. Personally, I'm not too fussed. I think it's an ambition I like and applaud ambition. Clearly, they intend to build an awful lot of homes. Whether they do, we are going to see. And as a result, we will be able to make a decision as to whether they're re-elected in 5 years' time. But His Majesty the King was out earlier this week giving Mr. Starmer a clue, like
So that's why the King is part of this story, because he was there and he was able to show Keir Starmer the evidence.
Correct. He's like an upmarket estate agent.
Okay. He's a curious addition to this story. That's why I was confused. I don't know what the King was doing in this. I thought we were talking about house building, but apparently the King knows his beans.
There's lots of reasons why you and I are confused, Ian, but in this particular story,
got a list.
The King was there because he, as we all know, has a particular interest in architecture and building in the West Country. Poundbury is something that was a personal ambition of his, and indeed a personal triumph, one might say, because it's up and it's built, and okay, it's taken a lot longer than 5 years, but it is acknowledged to be a pretty or beautiful place to live. There is infrastructure, there's doctors, there's dentists, there's primary schools, and you can commute and drive and get access to and from it. Now, this is what the Labour Party are talking about. They have crucially not identified the 100 sites that you quite rightly refer to, where they are going to build, they say, 10,000 homes or more. Remember Ebbsfleet, Ian, that we talked about on the programme now. Nearly 7 or 8 years ago, I think we were last talking about it, which is yet to be completed, is only 5,000, so half the size of what's been predicted here. But they're talking about homes the size, they're talking about towns the size of Reigate or Market Harbour or Felixstowe, which is obviously quite an appreciable conurbation. They are all going to need schools. They're all going to need sewage, electric, everything that goes with modern 21st century living. It's a tall order, but I think that the politicians, for once, regardless of their political colours, should be applauded for actually getting up and saying, we're going to get on and do it. Proof of the pudding will be in the building.
Can they build? I mean, this is the bigger question. I mean, Labour's promise of how many new homes is it? I'm just trying to remember.
1.5 million.
1.5 million. I saw a figure earlier of how many they built in the last year. I know that was across a couple of governments, but it's so tiny. This current government have been in power for over half a year. So in theory, they should by now have built, a couple of 100,000. I don't think they have. They're not going to do this, are they, Henry? This isn't going to happen.
Ian, here's the issue, and it applies to all of us, me included. When you look today in the 2025 at how long it takes to actually get planning permission to build a development, we're talking about over 5 years by the time you from start to finish. And therefore, what is being built today was planned clearly in a different era and many years ago. And what Labour are talking about and the government are talking about today isn't going to start to come to fruition. We're not going to be able to judge it, you and I, until their last year of office, probably at the earliest. These things take an awfully long time, and they've got to build, as we mentioned earlier, all the infrastructure around it, and that is going to take an awfully long time too. And just imagine the number of people who are going to pop out of the woodwork and say, I don't want pylons coming to service a town of 10,000 new homes that's 30 miles away from me. I don't want my village that my family have lived in and grown up since the Doomsday Book to be increased from 300 houses to 10,000 houses. There's an awful lot that has to be dealt with, and historically we've been really bad at dealing with that sort of thing. Labour say, and the Prime Minister says, he's had enough of the blockers, he's had enough of the NIMBYs, he's going to crack on and do it. and we will have to wait and see. But I applaud the ambition. I think it's unlikely that the targets will be met, but I don't think we should judge them on the targets. I think we should judge them on the difference it's going to make to you and to I and to everybody listening to this.
Spot on. Henry, as ever, thank you. Great expert view from Henry Pryor. Thank you to him. Pauline Lee says there is a draft in place in Ukraine and many men escape the draft by heading to Western Europe through quiet borders. Your last caller is correct. Well, he might be correct on the fact there might have been a draft. I'm not sure he said there was a draft. He said, why aren't they fighting for their own country? But in fairness, you might not have wanted to. So you wanted to escape the draft. Marcella says, quite tired of the Ukrainian business. I do not remember the West being this righteous when the Soviet army, including Ukrainian soldiers, occupied Czechoslovakia from 68 to 89. Ukrainian soldiers then not too big on democracy with Czechoslovakia people, which Czechoslovakian people wanted. But hey-ho, now they're getting money from the West. They are the full of talk and the right to democracy. Yeah, I mean, I think stories do change and times change as well. Let's get a call in. Andrew in Hertfordshire on this point. Donald Trump, can he achieve it, Andrew? Peace in our time. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. You do a cracking job. I think it's very sad. I think it's very sad, Ian. You know, you could take the man out of the game show, but you can't take the game show out of the man. Domestically, yeah, the immigration policy, you know, cutting down on waste and government overspend. But this is very sad, really. He's let himself down. The stark reality here is that what Ukraine can do. Trump doesn't understand that Putin sees Kiev, where Peter the Great was ordained into Christianity, as part of Russia. So all Zelensky has to do is say, do you know what? Why don't you have the whole of Ukraine? We'll go to the Polish border. Yeah. We'll actually sign it across to you there. And then all of a sudden, Trump is compromised because the actual value of Ukraine is in the rare earth metals that are there. And at the moment, he's trying to impose something on him, and he's looking for the big showman deal. There's no deal to be done here. The only thing you can do is actually hang out and push Russia back. And it's very sad that he actually can't see that. And, of course, when you've got, you know, I'm not going to put down someone like yourself who is an objective journalist, but when you've got someone who effectively is running defense now, who was a game show host on a news program in the US, you can see how light they are in foreign policy. It's actually quite worrying.
Do you think, though, despite that, and this is the curious thing of Trump, I mean, he's all about the unconventional, isn't he? I mean, he's got, you know, a health minister who doesn't know anything about health. He's got loads of opinions on it. He's got a defence minister that was in the military, but as you say, you wouldn't describe or in any way suggest is a seasoned military expert, although, you know, we appoint people. John Healey, our defence secretary, I don't know what his experience is of defence, having said that.
Yeah, but he went after Assad, I think it was, after they put mustard gas and he saw pictures of children. Those Russian soldiers, they raped their way into Ukraine and they stole children. You know, why do women and children suffer all the time? He's got this 100% wrong. This is a bad policy. Yeah. It's a great showman's thing to do, to walk around and say you ended the war, but at what cost? And Zelensky just go to the Polish border, sign it across, and then have NATO with Russia right on the doorstep of Poland. How did that go historically?
Yeah, it's potentially full of bear traps, this one, isn't it? But we will see. Listen, great call, Andrew. Thank you very much indeed for that. Andrew in Hertfordshire, just gone 3:45. Just a reminder, by the way, there's a chance for a big win right here on Talk. You could find yourself in with a chance of winning £25,000. Have a listen to this.
It's competition time, and we're giving you a chance to win a whopping £25,000. So what do you need to do to get involved? All you have to do is text the word prize to 83338 or you can enter by post. It's as simple as that. Once again, to get involved, just text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post.
18 plus, UK excluding NI. Enter by SMS for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on March the 3rd, 2025. Or send your name, email and contact number to £25,000 cash competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on March the 6th, 2025. This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
We better start off with the growth figures, I suppose. 0.1%, hardly pushing the boat out, really, is it?
The economy is very flat, Mike, and has been since this government came into office. So you'll recall that during the general election, Labour talked a great game about growth. Once they came into power, I'm afraid they talked the economy down, which extinguished the sort of animal spirits and business confidence. You see that in all those business surveys.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is 10 to 4 on Talk. This comes in from John on the Isle of Coll, who says, as a farmer, the local council wouldn't let me build a farmhouse on the farm. Incredible. You all slag off farmers, but who does? Well, not here, we don't. But between the council and all the environmental agencies, you do wonder if you actually do own the land. It's a fair point as well, especially if they're, chopping down forests to build a solar farm. This will be Bill in Telford. You got a heat pump issue, Bill. What's happening?
Yeah, essentially one of my customers, we built this eco-friendly house a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So it's insulated with like yard-thick walls of insulation, and you name it, it's got it.
Mm-hmm.
However, they were moaning about high electricity bills, so I went and put a meter on the supply coming in, and it turned out, after a bit of faffing about, it turned out that the heat pump was drawing 12 amps. constantly, 24/7.
Okay.
So that's like having your kettle on the whole time. So if you imagine what one of those old-fashioned electric meters you used to get, we used to like watch the wheel.
Watch the wheel go around at 100 miles an hour.
Yeah, that's the issue with those. So a heat pump, yes, it might warm your house a bit, but it'll eat your electric, so you're not getting anything for nothing.
Yeah.
And the other point I wanted to make was one of my other customers has got a small factory unit, works on his own, building machines and things, and his standing charge for his electric is £450 a month. So he would get like a £500 bill, of which 50 quid is the actual electric he's used.
Got it.
So he's now disconnected from the grid, and he bought a generator from China and uses a generator instead. So in 3 months, he's used like 60 quid's worth of diesel.
Jeez.
This is absolutely
just to try and make it work.
Yeah, just to make it work. And the funny thing was, when he had his generator delivered, there was another half dozen generators on the back of this lorry getting delivered to other small businesses around the country. So buy a generator made in China and plug it in over here and fill it up with diesel.
I mean, the heat pump thing is more mysterious than any of the things we talk about. When we can talk about solar panels, yeah, I know that a solar panel can work when it's fired up. We know it can. Nobody's disputing the science. I know a windmill can work. We've used them for hundreds of years. But this heat pump thing is really curious, isn't it? Because the amount of voices, even from the left. I mean, Dale Vince, for goodness sake, the environmentalist, who's all for the net zero aim. He's all for wind farms and for solar farms. But he can't get his head around heat pumps for one moment.
No, well, these things, I mean, this particular model that they had fitted, I was asked, when I wired the house up, I was asked to provide a 32 amp supply to it and two 16 amp supplies to it. So there's 3 different elements going on inside this flipping great big box. But in a nutshell, it is drawing a kettle's worth of power 24/7 to operate it.
That's extraordinary.
That's a 2-bar electric fire on 24/7.
Yeah. So that's not really it's not really ticking the very box it's set out to tick, is it? In any shape or form?
Not really.
Listen, Bill.
Call me a cynical old git if you like.
Nothing wrong with that. Listen, it's becoming a prerequisite for existing at the moment, being a cynical old git. If you're not a cynical old git, then you stand no chance of survival in this strange, foggy world we've found ourselves in. Bill, you've been brilliant. Thank you very much indeed for that. This one comes in from Don in Chelmsford. I know this may be unpopular, but why does the UK get involved in Ukraine? We are not wealthy anymore. The only thing I support is the brilliant rescue of zoo animals who are totally innocent. Well, most of them are innocent. I mean, there's some dodgy ones in there. This in from Paul. The development of Newquay is on Duchy of Cornwall land and was started by the King. My question is, how many of those homes will end up as second homes for DFLs? That's down from Londoners. Most of the people building it are Cornish, says Paul in Cornwall. Aren't they whacking a extra council tax on second homes in fact, I know Devon, I think, have doubled the council tax. Parts of Wales, I think they've tripled it if it's a second home. If you have the audacity to want to buy a second home. It's not a good thing. But I get it. I mean, if you're buying the second home at the expense of a local, then there's a problem there, right? And this one in from Paul. No, I think I read that one in from Paul. This one in from Steve, who says, what a stroke of genius by Reform announcing a windfall tax on green energy companies. I would love to be a fly on the wall at their meetings. Let's speak to somebody who has been at their meetings from time to time. Not this one, Alex Phillips.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Yeah, all right. Not bad, yeah.
That's great. Good. You looking well?
Thanks.
You feeling better?
Yeah, I'm a lot better.
So I was just looking at your glasses. I couldn't work out whether they were glasses or whether you've been welding. I wasn't quite sure what had gone on.
They've got like a strange sort of reflection.
No, they're just quite big.
Are they? Have you not seen me in glasses before?
Yeah, loads of times.
Well, why are you suddenly surprised by them?
I don't know, because I looked up and I don't see you at this junction in a pair of specs.
I'll take them off again if it makes
Well, I don't recognise you now.
There you go.
You could be anybody.
Yeah, well, you know, I wonder what you look like without glasses.
Oh, you don't want to know.
Take them off. Let's have a look.
Now, there you go.
God, you've got tiny eyes, haven't you?
Have I?
Yeah.
I've never been told that.
Yeah, quite slitty, aren't they?
There's no need for that.
You and Keir Starmer, you do the same thing. You wear glasses to cover up your tiny eyes.
He never had glasses, did he, before?
He doesn't need them, does he? They actually make him, because I think without the glasses, he looks quite cold and harsh. So? He's got a bully's face, do you not think? Like tiny little eyes.
Do you think so?
Without a soul.
Maybe he has.
And I think the glasses soften him. They make him look a bit more sort of...
They just literally appeared overnight one day.
Yeah.
But then that happened with Blair as well, didn't it? One day Blair put a pair of specs on at the dispatch box.
Oh, did he?
Well, where did they come from? Never mentioned these before.
Yeah, interestingly, Farage actually wears glasses, but you never see him wear them. So he's the opposite. He actually needs his bins, but he never really puts them on in public.
I'd see that. I knew you'd been to reform meetings.
But there you go.
When
and I
glasses
see him
are on
wearing
the
those
agenda.
glasses.
You've seen the glasses in action.
He suits them. I think he should. But if he started getting out his specs now, people would be like, oh, well, you're just doing that, aren't you?
So you're doing favourite politicians with glasses as your first subject.
Yeah, clearly.
It's going to be great.
It, yeah.
Clearly or not so clearly, depending on the glasses.
Depending on the glasses.
Yeah. What else is going on, Alex Phillips?
Well, we've got